across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker or watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is always, as wonderful, great to have your company. And if you manage to get the gully in your pavement so you can get your EV plugged in, even though you haven't got a drive rate like most of us, well done to you. I completely understand Mike's obsession with that. It drives me at the wall. It's just a classic example in everything this government does, and in fact most governments we've had in recent years, where they solve the wrong end of the problem. We're going to see that in Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's Mansion House speech as well tonight, which is going to be talking about mortgages and pensions and things, and they're going to solve the wrong end of the problem. We're going to talk more about that on the show tomorrow after we've heard what Rachel from Accounts has to say. But today we've got a lot more to talk about, and if you're going to miss anything of the show, if you happen to, I don't know, have a life, a job and something to do, don't forget you can see everything on my YouTube page. It's cunningly called the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show, so you can find it very easily. Hit subscribe and you will never miss a thing. All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump. He's threatened Russian leader Vladimir Putin, warning if he doesn't sign a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine in 50 days' time, then the US president will punish Moscow with 100% tariffs, with secondary sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil, in particular China and India. Not quite as high as what Congress has suggested earlier in the year, 500% tariffs on those countries. But let's face it, a lot of the economic sanctions that are being placed on Russia are utterly meaningless when countries like India and China are buying the oil and selling it back. And then often, by the way, we're ending up buying those secondary goods ourselves anyway. But the president also unveiled plans to sell billions of dollars of military equipment, including Patriot missiles, to NATO countries. And we're going to pay for it. $10 billion, I think, is the first tranche. And we're going to send that on to Ukraine. So basically replacing the weapons, actually, that we've already sent on to Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're going to talk about the BBC. Again, later today at midday, we are going to see the announcement of the BBC's annual report. We'll see, what big stars are earning and the like. BBC are trying to get all the bad news out in one tranche, aren't they? After they've come under fire over that Gaza documentary narrated by the son of a Hamas official, and of course the fracas over Greg Wallace and everything else as well. I mean, the Bob Villan's appearance at Glastonbury and being streamed live on the iPlayer. But we're going to be talking about, some of those aspects with my guest at just 10:20. That's former Tory Defence Secretary Dame Penny Mordaunt. She's co-authored a new report, we mentioned it on the show yesterday, exposing widespread anti-Semitism across the NHS, education, the police and the arts. And of course, I'd say endemic in the BBC, hence why we keep seeing all those problems. Plus, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting has called resident doctors' vote to strike unconscionable. Comments came after doctors voted to strike for 5 days from July the 25th, demanding a 29% pay rise. Wouldn't we all like one of those, eh? So it's just coming up to 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Delighted to say that Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, as regular on a Tuesday, joins me today. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julie.
We have got so much, so much to get through today. Where do we even start? Let's start with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He told Putin, basically, sign a peace deal, you face 100% tariffs plus extra tariffs on the people who are buying your oil. Basically, he's only able to keep up his war effort in Ukraine by selling his oil, selling his gas to countries who haven't got an embargo on it, and India and China are happy to get it, nice cut price. He's making a big fortune on it. If we could deal with that, and we should have dealt with it, by the way, 2 years ago, then that would make life very difficult for Vladimir Putin. The economy would pretty much collapse, would it not? That's pretty much all Russia has to sell. What did you make of this apparent big change of stance from Donald Trump in the Oval Office? So different from, this conversation with Zelensky last February when he basically threw him out of the White House. Basically saying Putin needs to come to the table and sign a peace deal. But what do you make also of the fact he's given him 50 days, allowing enough time for Putin, who's already talked about this, 60-day, from about a week ago, 60-day plan to ramp up his attacks on innocent civilians in Ukraine, who, by the way, the people who march for peace and civilians don't seem to care about.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where we will have to wait and see how this pans out. That time frame is a concerning part of the picture here. But I suppose this, coupled with the fact that he's also talked about sending top-of-the-range equipment to Ukraine via European countries who will purchase it and then give it to Ukraine, suggests that this has been a real gear shift. I think this was probably inevitable to a certain extent, because Donald Trump had a certain view of what this conflict was, that they're almost as if Ukraine were the aggressors, or they were the ones who were making it drag on longer than it had to.
He said, Zelensky, you want war. You want, like, what?
Absolutely, as if he wasn't the leader of the nation that was invaded. You'd have thought it was the other way around. But the problem was that was always going to collide with the reality of this conflict, the reality of what Vladimir Putin was trying to get out of it. And say what you will about Donald Trump, he's not an ideologue, and also he doesn't like looking like a sucker. So I think the point
he has been looking like a sucker.
It started to go that way. I think that this sort of U-turn was inevitable. Whether or not it will hold, whether or not it's exactly the right plan, we'll see. But I think this moment.
And if it's for the right reasons. I mean, he's saying, I'm having these really good conversations with Vladimir Putin on the phone. And I said to my wife, I'm having a good conversation with Vladimir Putin. She goes, oh, he's just bombed a hospital. I mean, the reality of this war, I mean, again, the whole world is pointing at Donald Trump and saying, you're being a chump here. I mean, you're being made a fool. MAGA crowd, the sort of real right-wing MAGA crowd, massively, massively anti-Ukraine. I've never got it. I've never got it, unless they're all bought up by Russian military. I do not understand why they could ever have come to that conclusion. I can vaguely understand but disagree with the idea that, it's not our problem, it's Europe's problem. There's a reasonable point that Europe should be paying for our own defence. It doesn't make sense. Whatever his reasons, I mean, I welcome it. It's a shift in the right direction. It seems to me that the new NATO Secretary-General, appointed because he had a good relationship with Donald Trump, Mark Rutte, has played an absolute blinder. I
mean, it's incredible. You've got Trump singing the praises of NATO now, saying that, I might have said it was obsolete a few years ago, but now it's going in the right direction. Collective defence is a good thing. I mean, this is an incredible about turn. I mean, Donald Trump is unpredictable at the best of times. He often will throw out certain lines and then do a complete 180 on it, but nevertheless, we're in such a different place to where we were even 6 months ago.
Yeah, this is a big change. A lot of people will say, oh God, she's not yapping on about Ukraine again. What's it got to do with us? It's in Europe. It's a war in Europe. It's the reason why your energy bills are still unaffordable. It's the reason why we're in such a financial mess. One of the major reasons why our tax bills are going to go up in the autumn. It's not just lockdown. It's not just the years of austerity. It's not just hopeless management of the economy and exploding welfare spending. Yes, those two. But it is also about the fact there was that massive bailout of domestic energy and actually business energy eventually a couple of years ago. Liz Truss and then Rishi Sunak. And that is why, one of the reasons why this really does matter. We need this war ended. I would like this war ended by Russia being defeated. We shall see. We probably are going to have some sort of supposed peace deal, but we need to have guarantees from Europeans and the Americans on this. I'd need the Americans to be fully behind that, whether or not we could trust that or not. But this is massively important in terms of message going out to Putin that you can't separate the West. We hope, and a message also to China as well. This has massive implications for our future lives, whether or not our sons and daughters ever get sent to war. It's that significant, and the taxes we're all going to be paying for years to come, and whether or not you're going to be able to afford the public services that you value because of the amount we're going to have to spend on defence if we do not stop Putin now. So people who think that this is not my problem, wake up. Smell the coffee. This is about us, our children, our finances, our economy, our welfare, everything. It's about everything in the here and now for us, and we really, really need to get to grips with that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000 if you want to have your say. But I also want to hear from you about where we are with the BBC, because after the Greg Wallace scandal, talked about that on the show a lot yesterday, all over the front pages today, the Gaza documentary nicely pushed off a lot of the news agenda. I wonder how that happened, BBC. Bob Villan's outrageous death chants at Glastonbury. I want to know very simply, do you trust the BBC? Simple. Do you trust the BBC? I was going to ask, do you still trust the BBC? I think a lot of you haven't trusted the BBC for quite some time. But do you trust the BBC? At midday today, we're also going to get, as I say, that annual report. That's the one that tells us, how much some of the biggest stars are being paid, and that's likely to show a drop since various people took pay cuts or have now left the BBC. Bye, Gary. But give us a call on 0344 499 1000 to have your say. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. First question to you, Tom, on this though is we got Greg Wallace sacked, we knew last week. The report that was supposed to have come out about Greg Wallace from Banijay Productions was supposed to have come out, the production company that made MasterChef for the BBC. That was supposed to have come out last Thursday. And then they said, Friday. And then they decided to put it out yesterday. Interestingly, I think, on the same day, around the same time as the report came out into this controversial Gaza documentary, which no one saw. I mean, I didn't see it at the time. I watched it before they took it down from iPlayer. I've got to be honest with you. I mean, it was kind of a struggle to get through, but it was important. If you're going to talk about something better, if you've actually seen it, I know, mind-blowing concept, eh? Outrageously, this was filmed, put out on the BBC, despite being narrated by the son of a Hamas government official, a terrorist group member. Simple as that. There's no doubt at all in my mind that the decision to put the Greg Wallace report out, delay that to, although it wasn't the BBC report, they'll have sway. The decision to have those two reports out on the same day, so we're all talking about Greg Wallace and not talking more about anti-Semitism at the BBC, I think is too much of a coincidence. But on top of that, we've now got John Turode, the co-presenter with Greg Wallace, questions whether he says that he was asked to resign over a racist remark that no one believes was. Apparently, he said a word in a song. It was years ago. He doesn't remember doing it. They can't even work out. They can't even work out whether it was 2018 or 2019. He doesn't even remember saying it. Doesn't think he did. And apparently, he apologised for saying the word which was in a song. So he might have been singing the lyrics of Gold Digger, which has the N word in. Well, again, if you don't want. It's just black people. If you don't want people to use the N word, don't put it in your songs. That would be a good top tip, wouldn't it? But we are in mad territory that someone asked to resign for something like that, and yet they don't have an issue with putting Hamas terrorist kids on the telly. The BBC is insane.
I mean, it's one of these scandals a week now, isn't it? And even though it seems like one could understandably speculate that maybe they pushed back the Greg Wallace report to kind of bury the Gaza documentary report, it just shows how many different scandals they're juggling, doesn't it? It's almost like, well, it's better that we're not accused of anti-Semitism today. Let's just, upfront the alleged sex pest. It's one of those things where you think, are these really the choices you've been presented with? I think that the Greg Wallace scandal is a really good example of how the BBC often underreacts in the first place and then overreacts later on.
Yeah.
So anyone going around a workplace, doesn't matter how big a star you are, you're a pretty big cheese around here, Julia, if you were constantly making lewd jokes.
I mean, I do.
My understanding is they got you down to about one a week, which is working just about.
I think that's still sackable.
Just about all around. But, if you were engaging in the kind of
I must stop sexually harassing the staff and apparently showing myself. I was going to say my meat and two veg. I don't have meat and two veg, contrary to some reports on Twitter. No, but I thought that's my thing with him. It's like,
past 10 already.
Can you not get your genitals out in front of staff? I don't think that's a big ask.
No, exactly. And it's the sort of thing that maybe could have been addressed a little bit early on. They let these things rumble on and rumble on and rumble on, and then suddenly it becomes this kind of feeding frenzy where the co-star might have said something once that he doesn't remember, is asked to resign as a consequence.
That's where you're into the Me Too territory. Harvey Weinstein's raping women. And someone once, touched someo's bottom at a party. Oh, it's the same thing. It's not!
No, exactly. And even with Greg Wallace, you could understand there'd be a different kind of world in which his behaviour could have been curbed and things might not have ended up in this particular position. But again, they underreact and then they overreact. So now we're having a conversation not only about whether or not John Turode should have resigned citing mental health over something that he doesn't even remember doing, which would be absurd.
Which no one even in the report thinks was a problem.
But also, do they even have to can the show because people will just find it so distressing to watch the last series of MasterChef that involves Greg Wallace?
This is the big dilemma at the BBC. Do we show this show that we've already filmed? Yes, is the answer.
What do they think is going to happen?
But this is that Stalinist thing of you have to people, they have to disappear. They have to they never exist in public life again. But again, also some of the things, again, it seems to me when enough people say, could this guy stop showing me his genitals?
Yeah.
And most of the groping allegations were basically found not to be the case.
No,
but
exactly. The
certainly
vast majority of it is basically being offensive.
Is words, and a lot of it is a long time back. I'm trying to find the notes, but it's all just completely. It's got completely out of kilter.
It has, and it is difficult as well because when you're dealing with one of these reports, even if they're commissioned by a very high-end law firm. This isn't a court of law. This
No.
isn't really set up to adjudicate serious allegations or even some of the less serious allegations. So you just think it should never have come to this point to begin with.
Yeah.
If only they could just run a tidier operation, a lot of these scandals wouldn't.
It's not
come
that
through.
complicated, is it? It really isn't. I mean, again, it seems to me the biggest issue for me is not whether or not someone saw Greg Wallace's genitals 5 years ago. It is whether or not the BBC cares two hoots whether they put a Hamas official
Absolutely.
son on the telly to do a puff piece about Gaza, which is what that documentary was. It was such a very questionable watch. And didn't notice and didn't care, wasn't an issue, didn't ask the right questions, even though some of the senior people at the BBC saw this documentary in advance and all very congratulatory about it. And the reality is that that is a much bigger issue for most people, not just for Jewish people in this country who are concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism, but the, in my view, rampant and rank anti-Semitism that now pervades so much of our media, but particularly the BBC. And we're going to be talking in a few moments to Penny Mordaunt, who's co-authored a report about anti-Semitism across the board in lots of different institutions, largely public sector, which I think, so it's where the left wing's working.
Yeah.
And I think that is telling, very, very, very telling. And the fact that no one kind of saw a problem. No one noticed. Even if this young lad wasn't the son of a Hamas official, you'd still look at this documentary and go, really? Like, really? You think this is an appropriate thing to put out? And given the fact they know perfectly well that nobody is reporting anything or allowed to deal with any media whatsoever in Gaza who isn't approved by Hamas. That is a simple fact. So by definition, you should be questioning who this kid is and who's allowed this to go ahead.
And also, it really cuts to the heart of what's rotten at the BBC. I mean, the Greg Wallace thing it's not unimportant, but it's kind of an HR issue almost to a certain extent. This cuts to the core of, can we trust it as a journalistic institution, particularly where this conflict is concerned?
The answer is no.
The willful naivety to the situation on the ground, the willingness to use Gazan journalists who, let's face it, they're operating in a theocratic Islamist dictatorial regime run by Hamas. Do you not think there's a bit of a nod and a wink involved with who is allowed to do journalism and who
And some of them are
isn't?
actual members of Hamas.
New York Times, Al Jazeera, BBC I'm sure as well, been caught out time and again hiring people who have said deeply anti-Semitic things, who have said pro-Hitler things on social media,
people who
have been harbouring hostages in their own homes.
And celebrating October the 7th, when we knew that women and children and innocent people had been raped and murdered and taken hostage. They wrote posts publicly on social media, Facebook and X, celebrating, saying, well, good on you, sort of celebrating October 7th. These people are unemployable in any field, let alone as people to be trusted as news reporters.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things where they just kind of skate over this, one scandal pops up, and I think actually they've benefited sometimes from the fact that not everyone is following this conflict with the same level of detail. It's not something
kind
which
of why
is always
we
going to
do
cut
it
through.
here,
Absolutely,
because I want to make sure that someone is talking about this stuff every day.
And it's important work, because otherwise you just get into a situation where these things can pass the BBC by just by dint of the fact that they don't kind of connect in quite the same way as a big splashy Greg Wallace
But the
scandal,
BBC will report every single time when someone in Hamas or someone in a hospital says we've had a load of kids and women who've been brought in who've been killed by IDF forces, even though they've got randomly no footage whatsoever of this policy, and the only of this is event, and nobody there is an independent person. I mean, it's just extraordinary. It really is. Can I also just mention, and I do think it's worth mentioning, an extraordinary story of a school which banned a 12-year-old girl from Diversity Day for wearing a Union Jack dress. We are going to be talking, I'm delighted to say, to the dad, Stuart Field, of this 12-year-old girl. She attended school. There's a Diversity Day. It's called Bilton School in Warwickshire. And she decided, she wrote a little speech. You have to do a little presentation. And she wore sequined Union Jack dress. You know I'm partial to a Union Jack dress, guys, and a Union Jack bowler hat, and she wanted to do sort of celebrating, tea and fish and chips and all of that, a little celebration of Britain, what a great place Britain is. And the teachers went, no, literally sent her out and told her dad to go and pick her up from school. Because because this is like Diversity Day, you can have British culture all the time. But the reality is, we don't get to celebrate British culture. But the idea that a 12-year-old girl, you're supposed to come in your national dress. Well, I have.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that tell you everything that is wrong with our schools?
I mean, it's so interesting that was the knee-jerk reaction. Like, it's almost, even without this being kind of stated policy in our schools or whatever, that there's this cultural cringe, there's this nervousness, there's this odd discomfort with anything.
And
that's
you know
actually
what
to
it's
do
based
with
on?
Britain.
Let's say the word. It's racist.
Interesting. I mean, do you think it comes down to that?
We know that.
I bet those teachers were white as driven snow.
Of course, but they're the people who are most obsessed with that. The wokerati, they're obsessed with it. So the England flag, definitely. Union Jack, probably. You know, that's why they want to wave EU flags to the proms, even though it's not. It's a British event. You know, it's this idea that somehow anyone who wants to fly the flag or wants to celebrate anything about being British is somehow talking about white supremacy, racism, bigotry. That, you know, anti-diversity, all that, multiculturalism, all that. But as opposed to, why don't we celebrate the culture? Why don't we celebrate the reason why there are all these kids at this school whose parents, they've either been born in the country, been brought to this country by their parents, but their parents at some point have come to this country, realistically, statistically, in the last couple of generations, probably last generation. And why have they come to this country? Because it's a safe, a nice place. For all its faults, Britain is a great country. It's a fair country. Even though, you know, again, so many people on the left think that it's just full of homophobia and racism. It really isn't. It really isn't. That's why people come here, and they can live freely and live openly and be themselves. Isn't that something that we should celebrate as part of British culture? Tolerance, being welcoming, you know, all that. That is what. That, to me, is what the Union flag represents. No,
absolutely. And it's just that intolerant edge to the supposedly tolerant set. And the bizarre kind of self-loathing. And also, particularly where kind of national symbols are concerned, these are actually things that should, in a healthy culture, bind people together of different backgrounds. You need to have a shared narrative. You need to have a shared flag. You need to have a kind of shared set of values. It's quite important. So to treat those things as kind of odd, jingoistic, bit racist, is self-destructive to the very society they claim they want to live in.
Every other country does that, and it's celebrated and applauded, and it's not thought of as a weird or questionable thing to do. And we really need to get back to doing more of that, absolutely. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Love to hear your thoughts on the BBC, because again, I think that's part of the problem. The BBC doesn't like white people, even though most of them are white. It doesn't like straight people, even most of their staff are straight. It doesn't like you know, Britishness or, you know, the English. I mean, you know, you can celebrate being Scottish or Irish or Welsh, not being English, no, because that's racist. I mean, that's where we are. I think it all ties into a lot of like the issues about trust in the BBC. But after the Greg Wallace scandal, after the Gaza documentary, the Bob Villan hate chants at Glastonbury, I just want a very simple question. Do you trust the BBC? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Also love to hear your thoughts on Donald Trump telling Putin to sign a peace deal or face tariffs and face punishment. Do you think that will actually work? And does it show that Donald Trump is finally waking up to the fact that he has been played by his big pal Putin? Tell us what you think. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
But he never does press conferences, never talks to hacks like you and I, Mike. You know, he's a bit of quizzing. You know, that's his job.
Yeah.
I think he's skating on a very thin ice at the moment.
I think he's looking closer to the end than he's ever looked this week.
But I'm afraid there's an element of truth to that. Tim is a friend, and he's done a very good job. But you know, I think too many mistakes, too many things have ended up at his doorstep, and that's because he doesn't have a flat catcher amongst other. And also, the systems are all there, but who's putting the system into operation?
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
This is a Talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, does these people who lead us actually hate Britain?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:27 is the time. I'm going to get to your calls in just a few moments on all the big topics coming in to the show. 0344 499 1000 right now. I was delighted to welcome Dame Penny Mordaunt, former Conservative Defence Secretary, to the show to talk about, well, this extraordinary report that you have co-authored along with Lord Mann, a former Labour MP, into, well, rampant anti-Semitism in so many walks of our daily lives. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I have to say, I mean, in looking at the report that this was put out, we saw at the weekend some leaks about this, and the report has actually been published today. Both you and Don Mann seem to be sort of quite surprised and shocked by the scale of anti-Semitism across the country. Sadly, I'm not, having covered this fellowship, but tell us what you found and where you found it.
Well, we put out a very general call for evidence to the Jewish community about what their experiences are like on a day-to-day basis, living in every part of the UK. And we went where the evidence took us. And there's been a lot of focus, understandably, on things like protests and policing, but less so in civil society. And so we heard from people in professions like teaching or independent social workers who have to be a member of a trade union or a professional body in order to work, in order to get their indemnity and their insurance to work, but were being appallingly abused by those organisations. We heard from very vulnerable people, patients in the NHS, disabled students at university, who relied on healthcare professionals or welfare officers, for example, who would need to have very intimate conversations with them. They'd need to have a lot of trust with them. But 5 minutes earlier, were calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people. So, it's
wait a minute. So
really about common sense.
So that blatant. We're not talking about someone, for instance, at work or dealing with a union official or a care worker who's got, say, a Palestinian flag pin on their jacket. Or we're talking about people openly in the workplace or in this position of trust, talking openly in very blatant anti-Semitic terms in the workplace.
Some of the evidence, and the evidence that both John and I found very shocking, was obviously at the more extreme end. But this is a bit of a sliding scale. And so what we think is, if you are in those professions where you're primarily looking after the welfare and the security and the safety of people, you work on Transport for London, for example, you should not be wearing those kind of symbols at work.
No.
Your job is there to build up trust with people. You know, if you're someone that's about to perform a medical procedure on someone, you don't want those barriers or those anxieties to be there. So this deals with both the really extreme end of the spectrum, but it's just trying to create some norms in the workplace. Yeah. And you can't legislate for this stuff. It requires on employers being sensible. It requires on us all doing our bit.
Well, indeed, and there's a big difference, isn't there? A lot of people would say there's a big difference between someone saying, I want to talk about, what's in the news, and I'm very concerned about, Palestinian children in Gaza being killed and blaming Israel, and then what people are saying about Zionists, what people are saying about Jews, and often those three things being sort of lumped in as one, and individual Jewish people living in England who've got nothing to do with Israel, may or may not hold any views on Israel, being somehow blamed for the actions of a foreign government.
Absolutely. I mean, that is it in a nutshell. This isn't about curtailing free speech in any way. In fact, I think that you're best combating things like anti-Semitism when you have free speech. People can criticise governments, they can criticise the actions of a particular state, and obviously there's a lot going on in the Middle East at the moment that people will be concerned about. But that is one thing. What you can't then do is go and pick on Brian at the water cooler at lunchtime in your workplace and have a go at him for something that he might have nothing to do with him whatsoever, because he's a Jew. And you can't ascribe things to a particular ethnic group. So that's what anti-Semitism is about. And it's just really putting some things in place that will help people's lived experience. It will help them go about their lives. And just being able to have confidence on the public services that we all should be able to use.
Well, it is interesting in your report, and again, it was commissioned by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, but I mean, I don't know whether it's relevant, but maybe worth pointing out that neither you nor John Mann are Jewish yourselves, and you both obviously come from Labour and from Conservative backgrounds, so you know, it's cross-party and like, but it's very interesting that you found this to be endemic in the arts, in healthcare, in academia, in education, in police, in a lot of our public bodies, where largely we often see people who congregate with left-wing views. We have seen there seems to be quite a disparity there in terms of the people's political views in some of those organisations. And yet these are people who would consider themselves often to be the kind people, anti-racist, would be horrified by a trans person being misgendered or any homophobia. Anyone ever talking about blacks or Asian people in a disparaging way, they would be rightly horrified. But they don't seem to think that applies to Jews. Anti-Semitism being treated as almost the acceptable face of a form of racism now.
That's exactly right. And I mean, one of the things that we recommend for HR departments is if they view Jewish people as just a group of people with a particular religion, they tend not to make them count. They should start thinking about Jewish people just as they would think about any other ethnic group. And then all of a sudden they will realise that they should be doing things that they're doing for other people in their workplace, for those people. And yes, this will mean, I mean, I take my hat off to Lord Mann, who I co-chaired this with. He's got a track record of taking on his own party when it was in the hands of anti-Semites and absolutely doing the right thing. And both of us together are very clear that where these sorts of extreme views exist, and I'm afraid they are in places like trade unions, there's a lot of evidence given to us with regard to particular unions, that cannot stand. And either those organisations clean up their act, or you must provide an alternative for people that want to be teachers or independent social workers and don't want to have anything to do with these organisations or pay part of their salary to them in order that they can
I would say they have to keep up their act, and they shouldn't be recognised as by employers if they are espousing those sort of views. Now, I'm very much a free speech campaigner, but the limits of free speech are where people are espousing openly, blatantly I don't think offensive phrases, but actually blatant racism like that. What are your concerns? I mean, you'd mentioned, in the arts it's an issue. What are your concerns about the BBC? They've been much criticised over the decision to allow, death chants from Bob Villan at Glastonbury, and no one pulled the plug, and it was still up there for some hours on iPlayer. A major fail because no one thought it was an issue for someone to shout death chants about the IDF. And then, of course, we had the Gaza documentary narrated by a Hamas official son. A whole litany of problems. I would say every single day something outrageous on the Today programme in which they are espousing blatantly anti-Semitic views when they don't even realise they're doing it. That's my personal opinion. I've taken that up with senior figures at the BBC who insist that's not the case. But did you speak to people at the BBC who are concerned?
Yes, we did. We spoke to staff networks and a whole variety of organisations. And I think there is a couple of things here. I mean, the BBC is a much loved organisation by many parts and many people in the UK. We love Sir David Attenborough. We love Strictly.
Do we?
But all too often, it does not love the nation back. And that's the problem. And so we've suggested some things which apply to every employer, and we've arrived at those things in part by talking to people who work at the BBC, Jewish people who work at the BBC included. But we also make another recommendation, which sounds very dull. It's about contract compliance. So what we're trying to stop is the scenes that we saw at Glastonbury, but also other arts organisations that want to cancel Jewish performers, stand-up comics and other acts like that. And we've seen a lot of evidence since 7th of October that people have been doing that. And especially if those organisations are in receipt of public funds. So we make some recommendations about strengthening contracts. You know, at Glastonbury, if the BBC had something in their contract which made the Glastonbury organisers think, oh, is it a good idea we book these people? It was inevitable what they were going to do. You know, we will preempt a lot of these situations. And that's what Jewish people are really wanting. They're wanting to be able just to go about their lives, enjoy their lives, use public services. If they need help from people who are charged with giving them a hand in life, that they can rely on those people and they're not going to have to worry or fret about accessing those services that they pay for.
Yeah, absolutely, and not living in fear. I know so many Jewish people who are thinking about leaving the country, and that is a source of absolute shame to our country, I believe. Can I just ask you? You're coping very well. Those who are watching, see that you seem to be in a wind tunnel.
This is about where I am at the moment, I'm afraid.
Do you want to tell us?
Sorry,
where are you?
I'm standing by the side of the road. My assistant goofed on the time, but I desperately wanted to talk to you and your listeners.
Well, we're very glad to have.
And I'm taking this interview somewhere near Buckingham Palace.
Well, just for people who aren't watching, Penny is coping in a winter. That beautifully coiffed hair, not quite as coiffed as normal as we'd recognise it. Just finally, I do want to ask you, as a former Defence Secretary, the news coming out of the White House yesterday with Donald Trump saying that actually he's going to send Patriot missiles, he's going to send $10 billion worth of, sell $10 billion worth of high-tech arms to the Europeans in NATO, which they can then pass on to Vladimir Zelensky, this threat of 50 days or before peace to Vladimir Putin. Do you think this is a big change in terms of the attitude America is taking towards NATO and Vladimir Putin and the Ukraine war? And do you welcome it?
I do welcome it. And I think although there's been some difficult moments in the last few months, you know, that scene in the Oval Office, I think that the president has been trying to give Putin every opportunity and every chance to do the right thing. And I think it was important that he did that he's tried to find a way to bring this to an end swiftly. And we know that Putin's been given every chance to do that. I think what Donald Trump has done today, and also with giving NATO a bit of a kick up the backside to make sure that all nations are contributing what they need to. And although we are currently saying we are not. The money needs to come as well as the rhetoric. I think he's done a good job. And I know that his senators, the Republican senators, people like Lindsey Graham and others, have been doing a lot of good work in the Senate to bring in some more financial incentives for Putin to do the right thing and stop this ridiculous war.
Thank you very much. Get back out of the wind. Dame Penny Mordaunt, former Conservative Defence Secretary, co-author of that report commissioned by the Board of Deputies of British Jews into anti-Semitism. A quick response from Tom Slater to what she had to say regarding the report.
No, I think it's important that we have a reckoning with this anti-Semitism. It's obviously exploded since October the 7th in terms of the abuse people were receiving, violent intimidation.
So weird because
attacks.
They were the victims. But
absolutely, it's despicable. But this has been building for a very long time. Anyone who's been paying attention will have seen this kind of ambient Jew hatred that was building up in this country from all different kind of quarters of society.
It's very difficult because you and I both believe in freedom of speech and everything, but you know, the BBC and none of these trade unions or the NHS wouldn't allow someone to like walk around with a T-shirt saying I hate black people or you know, or death to black people, or using the N-word repeatedly, or the P word about Asian people. I mean, that wouldn't be acceptable. We'd all accept that is not a reasonable thing to be allowed in any walk of life, let alone in the workplace. But apparently Jew hatred, completely normalised.
No, there's a complete willful blind spot to it, even from the supposed anti-racists. If anything, given the rise of left anti-Semitism over recent decades, it's often the people who claim to be the most dead set against prejudice who have revived the world's oldest prejudice in the form of this. So it's something which really calls into question so many different layers of society, and particularly the combination of either blindness to it, complicity to it, involvement in it, in terms of this form of racism, from even people who claim to know so much better than the rest of us.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that, and also hear your thoughts on the BBC generally. Do you trust the BBC after all their various failings, whether it's Greg Wallace or the Hammers Report or Bob Vinnan at Glastonbury or everything else? I'd love you to get in touch, get some calls. Up next, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, this is Talk. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's coming up to 10:44. Let's squeeze in some calls. Apologies, we're waiting to get Penny Mordaunt on the line. We outside a very windy Buckingham Palace. Let's go to Robert now, who's in Northumberland and wants to talk about the BBC. Good morning to you, Robert.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
There's no doubt in my mind that because people have got such short memories, the BBC will be yet again allowed off the hook. I mean, if you mention to anyone Martin Bashir or Hugh Edwards, they all look at you and they say, oh yes, I forgot about him.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, the Martin Bashir, I mean, again, very, very different problems from both those two people. Hugh Edwards, obviously outrageous, disgusting behaviour, predatory behaviour. And again, I don't know how he escaped without a prison sentence for looking at or being sent images and not reporting disgusting abuse of rape of babies, for God's sake. I don't know, how on earth that happened. But then Martin Bashir, again, blatant lies. I mean, completely outrageous way that he went about getting that Diana, Princess of Wales interview that kind of sparked the royal divorce. I mean, again, nothing happens. Everything gets kicked into the long grass.
So it's going to be history repeating itself again, isn't it, really?
Do you think that's why John Turode from MasterChef, he claims that he was asked to resign and then claim he had over as far as, I mean, they say it's substantiated, but I don't see how it could be an unsubstantiated claim that he said a racist word, immediately apologised for it, and no one can remember even what year it was said. I mean, for goodness sake, or sung in a song. I mean, and being told, could you resign and claim mental health problems? And he refused to do so. I mean, it's almost like they're just trying to, can the whole show, get rid of both of them and just say, not our problem. I mean, it's just outrageous behaviour by the Beeb.
Yes, and of course, don't forget this government, they need the BBC, don't they, really?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it basically backs them up, doesn't it?
Yes.
I thought it was quite interesting. Have you noticed how the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nanny, she's been very critical of Tim Davie and the BBC. Do you think that's quite a welcome change?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't think it's really all that severe, was it, really?
Yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, they'll still get billions of our money, won't they?
Yes, there's no doubt about it.
And they'll carry on in their jobs. Well, in an hour and a bit's time, we'll find out the latest BBC annual report and see what everyone's earning. Robert, thank you for that. It's a very good point. We've all got short memories. There have been so many scandals. We just moved to the next one. Louise is on the line and she's in Kent. Hello, Louise. What do you want to say?
Oh, hi. Yes. It's about this whole Gaza and everything with it.
Yeah.
You know, one of the big problems, if you only watch things like the BBC and you don't bother to go out and find out any other information, and unfortunately, if you do, the algorithms on the internet will track you and that's all you see.
Absolutely.
So you have to actively look for it. But I was talking to someone the other day. I was just so shocked. I had to almost give up and walk away in the end. I was absolutely livid. She was saying, about the Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. So I said to her, do you know what actually genocide actually means?
Yeah.
And then she said, and I said, so the IDF dropped leaflets and anything else to tell people to move out the way. They did the same in Iran, incidentally, to tell people they were going to bomb a military thing, but any civilians needed to move as well. But so then she said, it's genocide. So I said, OK. So can you explain to me what Russia is doing in Ukraine, bombing old people's homes? Isn't that, aren't they trying to wipe the Ukrainians out? Well, actually, that's different, she said.
Yeah.
So then I looked at that and I just thought, so then I said, well, what about the fact of October the 7th?
Oh, no, don't.
I'm not sure about that. She said, bearing in mind that most people from those parties were actually against Netanyahu, I think there's something funny going on there. I just thought, I can't believe this. But what really bothers me is this report that's just been done about, how the institutions have been captured. But that's all the way around.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We see the BMA.
I've had the same conversations with family and friends as well, in terms of, if you're just getting your news from the BBC or a lot of newspaper outlets, you simply will not know the actual facts. When I actually say, here are some actual facts, and they often go, I didn't know that. Well, no, because people are choosing not to give you those facts. And it breaks your soul, Louise. It really does. Thank you so much for that call. Keep on fighting the good fight, one person at a time. That's what we do. Coming up next, we'll take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics. Going to talk to him about where we are with the doctor strike, and is it unconscionable, as Wes Streeting says, for those doctors to ask for that 29% pay rise? That's up next. This is Talk.
If you want the people that they are calling working people or working class people, if you want the poorest in this country to feel better off, what you want is economic growth. What you want is more jobs. What you want is high-paying jobs. Everything the government is doing is completely an antithesis to that, and we really have to be very clear about this. The way you ensure that we have a growing economy is not by increasing taxes on the productive parts of the economy and spending more money. You know that public sector spending is about to get up to 50% of GDP.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk the Home of Common Sense. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's keep your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. Anything you want to talk about, particularly whether you still trust the BBC, if you ever did. Right now at 10:52, though, let's talk about those doctors' strikes. Resident doctors have voted to go on strike as of the 25th of July, and that's going to be for 5 days. Rather convenient in the middle of the hot summer holidays, isn't it? But the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has said that their actions are unconscionable, as a member of his own family is waiting for the inevitable call to tell them their procedure has been cancelled due to those strikes. Well, let's talk about this with Jamie Jenkins. He's the former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics and joins us. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, we talk to you often about, statistics. Like, first of all, can we just talk about this demand for a 29% pay rise? Because the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association, said they were going to go for more money as soon as they got last summer, when Labour came into power, they had 22% pay rise. They've also had another 4.5% pay rise since then. That's over the rate of inflation that we currently have. But the Doctors' Union has said if you go on the retail price index, we are 29% worse off than we were in 2010. And we just want to get back to a real terms pay equity to where we were before austerity hit. The government says that's not true. Who's right and who's wrong?
Yeah, well, it's like statistics. You can always fiddle the story whichever way you want to on this one, Julia. So they're using the retail price index. That's an inflation measure that the ONS still produced, but it kind of got discontinued as a main measure many years ago because of kind of flaws in the methodology. So it's the consumer price index is generally what we use. And that's generally lower than the retail price index. So that will be the unions trying to inflate the number. But if we look at where the economy is overall in terms of pay rises, it's currently running on average about 5.2% is what the average pay increase is over the year. That will come down, though, Julia, because if you look at the latest numbers, we still got a bit of an overhang for that high inflation. So because you're right, inflation's been coming down. It's closer to 3% than it is 10%.
But it was 11%, and people weren't getting 11% pay rises that year, were they?
No, and because inflation's coming down, obviously people are negotiating pay settlements, which are much lower. So the 29% is just unrealistic. And if you go with the argument of the unions that they want to try and fill in this gap from all the way back to 2010, the difficulty you go there is you can apply the same logic to many public sector workers, Julia. So that's, should everybody in the public sector have a 20 to 30%
Well,
paying?
and private sector workers, there was always this argument that public sector workers lost out. There was that freeze on pay under David Cameron for a few years and George Osborne, or 1% increases, so below inflation increases, and how hard the public sector did, as if everyone in the private sector was living the life of Riley.
No, and you're spot on there, Julia. And I also remember an important thing that's not really mentioned by the unions is many of these resident doctors, junior doctors, whatever they want to call them now these days, joined after 2010. So they knew exactly what the pay offer was when they came into the profession in the first place. So asking for this ludicrous 29% that they're not going to get, it's probably negotiating tactics. Ask for 29%, see what they'll come with. But the fact is they caved in last year to the demands. So if you're going to cave in once, you're just going to go back for more.
And a lot of us pointed that out, didn't we, last summer? If you cave in at that point, and then they said, well, we've solved the strike. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like solving the Ukraine war. Yeah, if you give Putin everything he wants, you can end the war, can't you? And they said within 24 hours they were going to come back for more, didn't they? Also ignores the fact of pensions. But I read recently also a lot of, when they make this comparison back to 2010, is before we had the EU Working Time Directive come into force for doctors. So it was the case previously where doctors would have their base salary, but then they would get some huge extra payments on top because they're working extra hours over their normal hours. And all these extra bonuses, working the weekend or the night shift, whatever. Now, they don't get that anymore because that they're now working fewer hours. So they're not comparing like with like. They're saying, yeah, doctors work loads of extra hours there and all these extra bonuses. And they're saying, we'd like that in return for not working those extra hours, which is not reasonable.
No, and it's a good way of, let's say, magical trick with numbers. You can compare two numbers that aren't like for like, come up with a headline, and that's what they're trying to grab on this. But I think ultimately, Julia, what the public want to hear is what's going to be done to sort it. And this will cost lives ultimately. You know, it doesn't really matter how many lives it costs. Just one life is too many if this strike goes ahead.
Yeah.
And it's just a ludicrous, 29% is just unrealistic. They're probably going to be lucky to get anywhere north of, say, 6-7%, because the government can't afford it.
But as you say, this is if it's a negotiating position, but they know they did very well last time. Here's the key thing, though. You said obviously people are going to die as a result of this, but when we had the 22% last year, again, after people had died, hundreds of thousands of cancelled appointments and delayed appointments, which and consultants filling in those jobs not available to say, yes, I think you do have cancer, you need to start treatment. There's a knock-on effect throughout the health system, isn't there? But crucially, after what happened last year, there was this pay announcement, but there was no reform, no requirement of any change in working practice or anything since then. And that's one of the issues, isn't it? Is that since lockdown and since basically NHS shutting down for 6 months to anyone who didn't have COVID, pretty much, which no other country did, by the way, and the damage that did to healthcare generally in this country, seeing it even in playing out in the number of kids who got MMR'd, that actually we're seeing fewer treatments taking place per doctors and nurses on staff. We've actually seen a drop in productivity in the NHS, haven't we?
Yeah, and productivity is a big problem with the NHS, Julia. We do need this reform, and they talk about reform, the Labour Party does. And the thing I always come back to when they talk about the reforms they want to do is that, health is devolved. So Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England, all manage differently. The Labour Party have run Wales for 25, 26 years, and we're going to have Senate elections next year. Where are the reforms that the Labour Party and these magical ideas? They could have been tried over in Wales. And I always think if you've got 4 different kind of healthcare systems, try something somewhere, have a pilot. If it works, roll it out across the rest of the country.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And Wales, Julia, is worse than England.
Indeed.
So the Labour Party have coming up with all these magical ideas now. They've had their time, they're just wasting it.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, exactly. Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics, thank you so much. Tom Slater, waiting patiently to have his tuppence worth opportunity, editor of Spiked Online. What do you make of this pay demand?
Well, first of all, there's always a bit of fiddling of the statistics, isn't there? Playing around with CPI and RPI and trying to make it look as inflated as possible. We've seen this before. That's not unusual. The thing that's very different this time around is the mood around these strikes. Even when they first went on quite a substantial period of industrial action last year, the public support was still more or less behind them, which might have sounded quite surprising. Now it really isn't. I think they really haven't read the room. And if you are a public sector union, let alone one in the health service, if you do not have the public on your side, it becomes very untenable very quickly.
And it's very interesting, of course, you can see the snowball effect. Well, if the doctors get this again or anything close to it, the nurses are going to say, well, we're not going to accept the sort of, just a slightly above inflation deal. And then every other public sector union follows forth. And we can put all of our taxes up because, hey, we'll just keep paying for everything. Love to hear your thoughts on that. BBC, Trump, you name it, give us a call. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. We're just coming up to 3 minutes past 11 o'clock. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. You knew that already. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Delighted to say still joining me is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. And whether you are joining us by listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is fabulous to have your company. If you miss anything on the show, don't forget you can always go to my YouTube page. It's called The Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. You've got no excuses not to be able to find it. You can hit subscribe. You never miss a thing. You can see all the big clips, or indeed watch the whole show again if that you were so inclined. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about Donald Trump threatening the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, warning that if he doesn't sign a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine in the next 50 days, then he'll be punished with 100% tariffs and secondary tariffs and sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil, crucially China and India. That will absolutely dry up the Russian economy and indeed the Russian war effort. So I want to know whether you welcome that or not. Is it a big change from Vladimir Putin, and will it be a game changer for the war, as he also unveiled plans to sell billions of dollars of military equipment, including those Patriot missiles, to EU members of NATO so that they can then hand them on to Ukraine. So the Europeans are going to be paying. It's a war in Europe after all, but they will be getting those high-tech weapons. Certainly Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has said a big thank you to the president. Also more about the BBC. They come under fire of that Gaza documentary narrated by the son of a Hamas official. They've also been talking, I mean, we've got this Greg Wallace report, you name it. Tim Davie has been humiliated by numerous reports. Later on in about an hour's time, we're going to get the BBC's annual report. We'll find out what everyone is earning. We'll talk about that. Plus, leading Labour donor and green energy tycoon, as we're choosing to call him, Dale Vince, your friend and mine, has called for climate denial to be a criminal offence and people sent to jail because it causes incredible harm. He tweeted in support of the Energy Secretary, his big mate, who he helps fund, Ed Miliband, who branded the Tories and Reform MPs as unpatriotic for not backing net zero goals. Send the police round here and I'll put the kettle on ready. This is Talk. As I say, we are the home of common sense, and Tom Slater, so much to talk about there. Where do we even start? Let's start with the BBC this time. We'll go on to Trump. All these different reports. We've got Greg Wallace being sacked last week over this BBC report, which hadn't been published yet. We're then getting reports from John Turode, his co-host of MasterChef, that he was asked to resign over a racist remark he may or may not have said back in 2018 or 2019 that wasn't said in a malicious way, and he apologised for it. It may have been lyrics of a song even, and being told he should blame mental health issues and refusing, saying, I don't even think I said it. And even if he did, frankly, get over it, everybody. They're worrying about whether or not they should scrap the new series that's been filmed, or whether they should show it. Like we're going to Stalin-style wipe Greg Wallace out of existence. It never happened. He never existed. Choosing to, well, let's face it. This was a private production company's report into a BBC show because they produced it. But that report was supposed to be out last Thursday, and then we were told it was Friday, and then it came out yesterday. Quite coincidentally, on the day that the BBC issued an internal report into whether or not they had breached editorial standards and guidelines in their Gaza documentary narrated by a Hamas official's son. Who knew whether this kid was a Hamas official's son? Who didn't know? Who knew? When did they know? Who didn't ask the right questions? Who didn't answer them? Who lied? So heads have to roll somewhere. Whether it's at the top, whether it's at the bottom, I don't know. I wasn't there. Ofcom have now said they're going to do a report, as people are saying this was an absolute whitewash. Tim Davie, the Director General, admits there are failings. We've still got that issue over the Bob Villan death chance to the IDF at Glastonbury. A litany of failure. I would say a litany of failure every single day on BBC coverage of Gaza and Israel. Do you trust the BBC on any of these issues anymore?
I mean, it's getting particularly difficult where Israel and Palestine are concerned, because you're absolutely right. The idea that the big story has become Greg Wallace being an idiot, that's not exactly breaking news, I dare say. That wasn't breaking news even before we found out the full extent
Greg
of
Wallace's
his comedy
Todger.
repertoire.
It's not as important as what's going on in Gaza.
Absolutely. And it doesn't draw out as many questions about the state of the BBC. This is an HR issue to do with an independent production company. It implicates the BBC, of course. They have a tendency to underreact to these kinds of stories and then overreact later on. But surely a much more pressing question is that this is a journalistic institution in large part. We are faced with covering and looking at a war of tremendous consequence, and yet time and again they're found not just to be biased, a little one-eyed, a little leaning towards one side, but actually giving vent to genuine prejudice, turning a blind eye to documentaries which are made in tandem with the son of a Hamas official, not even recognising any of this as a problem. And if this was one documentary, that might be excusable, but if you think the number of instances of BBC News just mindlessly repeating what has essentially turned out to be Hamas propaganda before correcting the record.
Correcting the record in a news in brief down here, even senior figures, Jeremy Bone. Is it Jeremy Bone? He was saying he does not regret reporting that Israel had bombed a hospital.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure if that was Bone, but I remember the instance. It was very early on in the war, wasn't it? And there was this claim that Israel had shelled that Al-Ahi hospital. Turned out to be a rocket from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, one of the other
and it hadn't actually
groups.
Hit the hospital.
Exactly, and that.
So all of the claims were lies.
Exactly, and it's one of those things where that lie is still getting around the world before the truth has got its boots on.
Oh, people still think that actually happened.
Goes. Exactly. Yeah. So these things are impossible.
But the BBC, I'm sure it was Bone. He does not regret. He doesn't regret it.
And this is the sort of thing that makes people lose fundamental faith in the BBC, because this is about what it's supposed to do in terms of informing people, in terms of educating people. And it's not even that it's just making a mess of it. It's completely losing trust because of the fact that it has this willful blindness where anti-Israel bias is concerned, to put it lightly, and where full-blown anti-Semitism is concerned, to put it a bit more strongly, when you've got them beaming out to millions of homes, people chanting death to the IDF, without even thinking a second thought about it. How do you get to that position is my question.
Because if they'd been saying death to anyone else, they'd go, oh no, this is outrageous. I mean, as I said, if they'd misgendered a member of the IDF forces, that would have been taken off air.
No,
I mean, no. If Bob Villan had questioned climate change as the biggest threat to the earth and to the people of this earth, they would have been taken off air, because that is actually BBC policy.
Also, it was the middle of the afternoon. Like, even if there was someone chanting about some other slightly more straightforward conflict, shall we say, people say maybe this isn't the sort of thing we should be putting out at tea time on a Saturday. It's that kind of thing where, for whatever reason, common sense abandons them where this issue is concerned. I'm sure there's many people working in BBC trying their best who are not guilty of these kinds of prejudices. But in total, you can't argue with the fact that there's a problem.
And people contact me. I've spoken to some people who are really quite senior people, and some quite well-known names who are horrified by what is going. Some people who ostensibly have job titles, which you'd think, well, they have some power of this, and they feel this tidal wave of this. And this ties into this report commissioned by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and we spoke to Penny Mordaunt, the former Tory Defence Secretary, who's a co-author of that report, about this anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, they're talking about public institutions. These are largely peopled by people on the left. We have a problem with racism in this country, and it ain't the far right, and it ain't people hating black people or Asian people. It ain't that. What it is a problem with white people on the left hating Jews. That's your problem. The rise of anti-Semitism is a much bigger left-wing problem right now, and they need to talk about it. But I do find it fascinating with the focus again. And we were talking at the end of last week. Greg Wallace. He's a big MasterChef's a big BBC show. Greg Wallace is a well-known face, and people want to talk about that. And it's very interesting. That's been the focus today, not what I would consider to be much more serious, as you say. That's more of an HR issue, but it does tie into that whole thing. And as our caller pointed out, there have been so many scandals that kind of blended to one. You think Jimmy Savile onwards, not only Jimmy Savile, everyone knew he was dodgy and he was doing something that, and when Newsnight tried to do a show about him to expose him, it was basically shelved. And in fact, virtually all the producers working on that lost their jobs in the following year, whereas anyone who tried to cover it up promoted. We saw, the covering up of what Hugh Edwards was up to. Not just the way he, sending tens of thousands of pounds to a vulnerable young man and asking for lewd photos, but also being very predatory with young junior men in the office. Utterly unacceptable behaviour in the modern workplace. The BBC doing reports about people doing that and being all judgmental about it, but allowing it in their workplace from a senior star. because he was a star. Other cases I can't talk about because they're actually coming to court. Martin Bashir, a caller mentioned earlier, a man who used absolutely outrageous techniques to get blatant lies, forging documents to try and get Diana, Princess of Wales, into that BBC Panorama interview, which was, absolutely one of the hugest interviews of my lifetime. But he did it under false pretenses, and very early on it was obvious to the BBC that they did know this was going on, and they covered it up. And this is what they do: they cover it up, they make excuses, and we've seen star after star after star, and this happened at other institutions as well. But you know what? I don't care so much what the ITV do or Channel 4 does or anyone else, because I'm not forced to pay their sodding wages. But we are forced to pay the BBC's wages. We are forced by imprisonment, if you don't pay the fine for not paying your BBC licence fee, to pay for these people who act as if they are so sodding holier than thou and so high and mighty, telling our children they're all queer and non-binary and trans, propagating that stuff, not covering Women's Hour on Radio 4 for 10 years, not covering the biggest single issue affecting women's rights and safety, the threat from the trans-identified men in women's spaces and sports and the like, not covering that for years. Women's Hour, I mean, what an insult, on every single issue. They are wrong on every single issue, but they think that they are above us. They despise stations like Talk. They despise us. They despise our audience. They think we're all awful, ghastly bigots. They're embarrassed that we might even ever watch a BBC show, and they're trying to educate us. Meanwhile, they are letting their stars be sexually harassing and flashing their genitals, and in some cases sexually assaulting children. Nothing is done until it's exposed in newspapers, by the way, like The Sun, in our sister station, our sister's newspaper. And they are promulgating one of the worst forms of racism that there is and has ever existed on this planet, and that is anti-Semitism. I don't know how anyone with any good grace or conscience can work for the BBC anymore. I really, really don't. It's
one of those things, isn't it? Every big institution has a tendency to, unfortunately, kind of protect itself at the cost of doing the right thing. That's not necessarily a new phenomenon, but in journalism you just think it's particularly perverse because you're just continuing to deal with stars, you're continuing to pump out material that might be really compromised, because the fact that the BBC, unlike one of the titles, one of the broadcasters in this building, is insulated from the market. It's people are basically compelled to continue to fund it, regardless of how far the BBC drifts from the values of ordinary people. That continues to be the case. And whereas, you would have a scandal in the newspapers, it's shut, the phone hacking scandal shut down the news of the world. Whereas if you could have scandal after scandal after scandal at the BBC, but because of the licence fee, doesn't make any difference. And I think the halo around the BBC also becomes a problem for the people who work within it. There's this kind of sense of like, yes, there are some problems, that was bad, we should deal with it, we should move on. But maybe we don't need to look too deeply because ultimately we're on the right side.
But ultimately we're the good people.
Yeah, what if you're not? What if there's a deeper problem here? And I think on the Israel-Gaza question, it's one of the really difficult things to deal with, is because this isn't necessarily just about a few bad apples. This kind of Israelophobia is the water you all swim in, whether you realise it or not. And dealing with that is incredibly difficult, particularly when you're kind of force-fielded from criticism in the way that BBC sometimes do.
Well, let's tell you a story they definitely won't be covering, and that is this girl, a 12-year-old girl, Courtney Wright. She was banned from her school. She was literally told to get out of lessons. Her dad, Stuart Field, was asked to come and pick her up from school because she turned up to a diversity day to celebrate different cultures. Wear your national dress, celebrate give a little talk to the class about your culture. 12-year-old British girl turns up in, outrageously, a Union Jack dress and a Union Jack bowler hat, with a lovely little speech prepared about tea, drinking tea and fish and chips and all this stuff. She was told, no, you can't do that. This is about British culture. You get that every day. This is about diversity. But there's no diversity allowed when it includes British culture. Absolutely true. We are going to be talking to the dad in about an hour's time. Stuart Field, delighted to say he's agreed to come on the show, tell us what happened. That's been an apology from the school. They realised they got this wrong. But, it's one of those stories that hits the social media and everyone goes, oh, yeah, did that happen, didn't it? Well, when the school apologises, yeah, I think you can safely say it did actually happen. But that is a classic story that, wouldn't be covered in the same way. Yeah. By the BBC, because everyone's probably racist or a bigot involved in that, aren't they? Because it involves the Union flag, and that's what they'll think.
No, absolutely. I mean, this story is almost unbelievable. It does sound like something that you or I made up to have something to talk about this morning. It ticks all of the boxes, doesn't it, in terms of the intolerance from the supposedly tolerant people, this idea that we're supposed to celebrate our respective backgrounds, culturally or otherwise, and yet if you talk about Britishness, which is also, by the way, supposed to be the thing that binds us together, it's supposed to be
the reason why people come to this country.
Absolutely, and yet that is the thing that's verboten. I find it fascinating that in this case, this was just the kind of natural knee-jerk response of the school, and then as soon as they get called out on it, they hastily apologise because it is ridiculous and obscene and all the rest of it. But why is that?
I can't tell you how much I'd be suing the school for if it was me. I would have loyaled up so quickly. I can't tell you.
It's a really fascinating kind of example of where we're at with this. If nothing else, this confusion about what it means to be in this country, what it is that's supposed to bind us together, what it is that we're supposed to be celebrating, and this weird contradiction, which is that supposedly each respective culture is supposed to be constantly emphasised, and difference is really important or whatever.
But they're all equal.
Except for when it comes to
British culture, which is a bit which is a bit embarrassing and something to be ashamed of. It really is extraordinary, isn't it? I thought our national culture now, and again, this is another ties with the BBC because they push this agenda every single day. You'd have seen the weather forecasts we've had, recently, and it's been hot. It's been quite unpleasantly hot at times because A, we're British, we're not made for it, and B, our homes are not designed for it because we're not used to having a lot of it. But we're having a load of warm summers. Let's face it, as soon as we all give in and buy aircon, we'll have a load of cold, rainy summers. You know that. I'm not buying aircon deliberately because I'd like to keep having warm summers, thank you, and having some nice time having a barbecue in the garden. But Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, has been accused, not surprisingly, of scaremongering in a campaign against net zero sceptics. He said that Tory MPs and Reform MPs who deny there is a climate crisis are actually are unpatriotic because this is the biggest single threat that faces this country. And of course, he's a big Labour donor, delightful Dale Vince, always halfway through a haircut, as Mike Graham always points out, has called for climate denial to be made a criminal offence. I mean, I think prison's going to be quite a laugh, though. That'd be a good bunch of sane people. Meanwhile, the government is going to give, mind-blowingly, really short of money. There's no money, we're going to have to put taxes up. Well, we were going to take away winter fuel allowance, 300 quid a year from people who were really struggling on low incomes as pensioners, but had to U-turn on that. We've really got troubles. They're going to give drivers up to £3,750 of your and my taxpayers' money to buy electric cars, but they're not allowed to buy the cheap electric cars from China. They're only allowed to buy more expensive electric cars. I mean, I'm not allowed to say the words I want to say on air because of Ofcom rules, but oh my beep, 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 how insane is all of this?
It's absolutely insane. And you can tell that they're on the back foot, that they're resorting to these. First of all, these
because no one wants to buy them.
No, exactly, these coercive tactics. Yeah. If electric cars were so wonderful, then you wouldn't have to have all of these subsidies, all of these inducements to make people buy them. The only places where it's you're actually seeing some growth in that market is people buying them for their fleet of cars to taxi people back and forth to the airport or whatever it is. Ordinary people are not buying them. Most of the car market is second-hand. Not only is there not a big second-hand EV market, but also they lose their value in a tremendous way because of the way in which the batteries grow. So all of these different things, clearly they're onto a loser, so they have to coerce. This stuff about criminalising quote-unquote climate change deniers, which just means anyone who disagrees with Ed Miliband and Dale Vince and their kind of apocalyptic fantasies that they indulge in. Again, if you were so sure of your arguments, if you were so convinced that this is the way forward, if you were so confident that if you make the case for the quote-unquote green transition, you can bring the country with you, you wouldn't be talking about throwing Nigel Farage in prison. I mean, it's just absurd, and it's authoritarian, and it shows you what I hope is the case, which is they know they're losing ground now. They know that the
but religious zealots, when they know they're losing ground, we discussed this on the show yesterday, they tend to double down.
And we've got to brace ourselves for that. But I think for the first time in a very long time, certainly since I've been paying attention to this whole issue, there is a kind of crack in the supposed consensus. People are starting to see that environmentalism means their life getting worse, more expensive.
Oh no, but all the polls, we're always told, but all the polls show people think this is one of their top 3 or 4 concerns. No, it's not. No, they're worried about paying the gas bill. Yeah. They really are not. I'm worried about, I want there to be trees and no litter and let's not have dirty, pollution in cities. Of course, but that's not the same as a concern about climate change hysteria.
And the polls show that. If you ask someone, do you want the climate to be good? They're like, yes, of course. And they say, would you like to spend even, a few pennies more to get to that point? And say, well, why should I? And rightly so. They know that we're a negligible amount of global emissions, so why should we?
It's utterly pointless. And it won't make any difference to any climate change change which is happening as a result of natural changes in the weather, which happen over many millennia, centuries and decades and over years, and we see it because people aren't stupid. People are not stupid. They know what's going on. The vast majority of people don't buy into any of this madness at all. But it is just extraordinary. Again, the idea, if you have to shut down people who disagree with you, it's because your argument isn't strong enough. Again, I don't want to shut down people who have, for instance, a different view from me on the BBC or on anti-Semitism. I do want the BBC not, or people that we were talking about that report into anti-Semitism, people not to be intimidating Jewish people in their daily lives. Yeah, absolutely. I was against shutting down those, what they are, what Suella Braverman had correctly identified as hate marches, because I'm like, no, people have a right to march those as long as they obey police rules. But when they insist on, like, oh, we need to go past synagogues and do it on a Saturday, then I think that's a different matter. And I think they are now blatantly hate marches and not, but I'm still inclined to allow things to go ahead. But I want the policing to be very, very clear that if you are shouting or having placards that clearly state things which are against the law, and, you know, Palestine, I support Palestine action, you can wear that T-shirt, you can wear that placard, hold that placard. At the end of the day, you will be breaking the law. You know that. Take the hit. That is the case. But as a general rule, you know, I'm it's like the trans debate. They want to try and shut us down from saying facts like men can't become women and trans women are not women, they're men. If you try and shut down people, it's because you haven't got the facts on your side. We have the facts on our side, so we're quite happy to have the debate. But again, go back to the BBC. The BBC and Ofcom believe that climate change is settled science and there is no need to have both sides, and that anyone who questions any climate change policy or net zero policy or whether or not we are in a man-made climate crisis is the enemy of truth and should be shut down, or in the case of Dale Vince, a Labour donor, that we should be criminalised. That is a different thing altogether.
It's nonsensical. The idea that anyone at Ofcom or BBC Verify or whatever it is that they're calling this has the kind of godlike right to proclaim what is and isn't true is absurd. All of these debates, no debate is ever really closed. And on this one, we're not even just talking about science, we're talking about policy, we're talking about people's lives, and that's what people want to argue.
If it was up to these people, then the sun would still be going round us, according to the science, cap T, cap S. Anyway, I want to hear from you on all the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, particularly about the BBC. Do you have any trust in the BBC anymore on all of these different grounds, whether it's Greg Wallace, whether it's Gaza documentary, Bob Villan, you name it. In about half an hour, we're going to get that report on the annual report for the BBC. We'll find out what all the big wigs are being paid. I'm sure it's gone down because they've lost a few big names, but will it have gone down enough for your licence fee pay? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
attention now really focusing on the autumn budget. We know that Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise taxes to stay within those fiscal rules, which she has set herself. She can't increase borrowing day to day, and it looks like the growth is going to come and save her. So it seems that after big retreats on welfare, winter fuel allowance, downgraded productivity forecasts, it looks that she's going to have to raise taxes in some capacity. And as political journalists, we're trying to read the runes in terms of where the axe will fall.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. So thank you so much for joining me. Still asking you whether or not you have trust in the BBC, or whether you ever had trust in the BBC. Lots of you are messaging in. You can call us on 0244 499 1000, text the word Talk 87222, or get in touch at talkTV on X. Rob says the trust was gone far before these scandals. Martin says, I stopped trusting, watching and funding the BBC years ago, and frankly I'm baffled that people still do. I'd love to see what their viewing figures are if you exclude waiting rooms, reception areas and old folks homes. I mean, that is true. I mean, I kind of think the last time I did watch something on the BBC, I think it's all, I mean, it's Talk or Netflix. I only listen to the day programme just to sort of
know how the enemy thinks.
Know how the enemy, yeah, it really is. It's just research. And my husband just said, you just do this to rile yourself up in the morning, mainly because he goes, I know you're listening to Radio 4 because you're shouting at the radio. Joanna says the BBC needs to be funded, especially when you add in the copious amounts of bias. No less, says Dan, than I trusted them before those things. Christine said, never trust them way before this. My eyes were open years ago. Nicholas says, and this is a fair point, Brexit was when I gave up entirely with the BBC. I always knew they were left-leaning, but they just didn't bother to hide it since. And Peter says the BBC hasn't been trustworthy since at least the 1980s. What took you so long? Let's go to calls. Steve is on the line. He's in Somerset. Hello, Steve. What do you want to say?
Oh, hello there. Just finishing off my fish finger sandwich.
Fish. Seriously, if you've got a video camera, we'll just have you eating the fish finger sandwich. The
last bit of evidence is just gone.
I love that. Are you ready now? You've got the ketchup. Are you ketchup or mayo or neither?
Nothing. I'm a naked fish finger eater.
You're puritanical about it, right? Good to know.
I have got clothes on.
We do. Well, unlike Greg Wallace, but there we are. Right. Should we get to the subject in hand, Steve?
Right. I'm fed up with the BBC. I don't trust them. I lost trust with them nearly 40 years ago when they, on one of their shows, they described Filipinas housemaids as thick. But
nice.
Look on this thing, particularly about the Hamas boy.
Yeah.
The recording. The BBC particularly, and I must admit you've slipped into it occasionally, called the father of this young lad the son of a Hamas official.
Yeah.
Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation by the United Nations and this country eventually, including several Arabic countries.
Yeah. But it is nevertheless the government of Gaza.
Yeah, but they are terrorists.
Yeah, but I always say the son of a Hamas official, which means he's the son of a prescribed terrorist organisation official.
Yeah, the official is, and it needs to be made clear. But the BBC, and unfortunately, I was driving a lorry yesterday, and the only one I could pick up was Radio 5.
I'm sorry about that.
Constantly referred to this boy's father as a Hamas official.
Yeah.
As though he was the guy you go down the post office.
Yeah.
And you get your international driving license. So something like that. Nice chap.
No, they don't mention usually that the Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation. They will say, some countries have prescribed this organisation.
Yes, including, as I said, places like Saudi Arabia, Jordan. You go through the list. You can
so
look
you've basically lost trust in them completely. Just what do you reckon on this Gaza documentary? Do you think Ofcom say they are going to institute a full report? I mean, I'm not sure I trust Ofcom on this either, because they've got very bad form on bias on many issues, blatant bias in my view. But do you trust them if they're going to carry out a report? Do we need that?
No, they were set up to protect the BBC, to stop all these. What was then, 20 years ago, streamed news or streamed programs like yourselves and many others. And you look at the ones, GB News has been hammered by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
The BBC has never, Ofcom have never done anything. GB News, if it wasn't for them standing up for themselves, would have been abolished.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I stand with them all the way on a number of the issues that they've been sort of attacked on. Absolutely, Steve, I so appreciate your call. You go wash up that plate there. Oh, I really want a fish finger sandwich now. 11:32. I hate when people talk about food on the show because I just start thinking, oh, if anyone wants to send a fish finger sandwich anywhere here near, we'll happily take them. Give us a call if you want to have your say. 0344 499 1000. Up next, take a quick break. We're going to be hearing from Rebecca Ryan, campaign director of Defund the BBC. I wonder what she thinks about the issue of trust in the BBC. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just to get to you a press release we've just had from showing latest polling from Portland Communications, showing that fewer than a quarter of people have said they know what Keir Starmer stands for. Only 24% of British adults said they understand the Prime Minister's vision for Britain a year after he entered Downing Street. 47% said they disagreed that they understood his vision. 23% neither agreed nor disagreed. So basically, people haven't got a clue what that man stands for. Mind you, pretty much same issue with Kemi Badenoch. I think that's quite interesting. I wonder if I'm just amazed that I don't know if Keir Starmer knows what he stands for personally, but I wonder what people think that the BBC stands for, because for so many years the BBC was seen as, not just in Britain but internationally, as the pinnacle of editorial neutrality, honesty, someone you could trust. Find out what the BBC said. And even in times of major news stories, whether it's war, whether it's lockdowns, like that's where people have gone to get what they believe is trusted news information. But is that what people still think anymore? Well, let's talk to Rebecca Ryan. She's a campaign director of Defund the BBC. Rebecca, I don't think it'll be a surprise to find out what your answer to the question is after asking you about the question we're putting to our audience. Greg Wallace scandal over MasterChef, the Gaza documentary featuring the son of a Hamas official, a proscribed terrorist group, as Steve's just pointed out on the phone, Bob Villan's death chance at Glastonbury going out on iPlayer for quite some time. Do you trust the BBC?
Oh, of course I don't trust the BBC. Absolutely not. Otherwise I couldn't be heading up this campaign anyway. But more and more we see the British public just absolutely appalled. Not only that they don't trust the BBC, but that they're forced to pay for it, and that's what really galls people. That they're bullied into paying for it if they want to watch any live broadcast TV whatsoever. Yeah. So if they watch any BBC at all, but they watch Sky Sports, they have to pay the BBC to be churning out this kind of extremely biased and really divisive content.
Yeah, and it is interesting, lots of the messages that have come in about, do you trust? And I deliberately didn't say, do you still trust? Because I know what people say I haven't, but when people say, how far back they go to, I mean, for me, 2016 on Brexit was just so outrageous. I mean, again, during the actual term, specific campaign terms, when there were actually legal rules regarding literally the amount of time, the number of guests you have on, the amount of time they get to speak, where they have to actually be unbiased. They can't just put some bloke in a working men's club in Sunderland up against, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and say that's a fair debate. But only when they weren't allowed to do that anymore did they have to change. But the bias was so outrageous. And still one of my greatest joys in life is watching the video of the people at the BBC's faces behind, when they realised that they had lost the referendum and voted to leave. But that's carried on. Climate change, the trans ideology, the anti-racism stuff, the everyone's a bigot because they're concerned about immigration. All of these issues, what's been going on with the coverage of Israel and Gaza, there's no doubt at all to me that there is a clear line that the BBC now takes that is not neutral, fact-telling, trustworthy coverage anymore.
Absolutely, and this is the thing that people are so frustrated about. And actually, we've written, it's great timing actually with the reports that have come out yesterday. We've written to the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, asking for her to put the BBC into special measures because we don't think that the BBC is fit for purpose. And it's also not okay for it to keep marking its own homework. Yeah.
Well, indeed, this was an internal. Well, the Greg Wallace thing. We'll come on to that. The report in the Gaza documentary was an internal report. No one knew, and it was all fine. No one at the BBC knew. But Ofcom have said that they're going to investigate. Do you trust Ofcom to investigate?
Absolutely not. As you were saying to the earlier caller there, Ofcom has its own issues. And we had one of their non-executive directors, Akil Ahmed, who was making a series of very dubious tweets online regarding, or comments online regarding the Hamas issue. So no, we don't trust Ofcom at all, and that's why we've made this call, because it needs to be completely independent. But that said, we don't want any additional funds to be spent on it, and therefore out of the BBC's pocket of what they've already taken from us.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that any of these investigations always end up costing a fortune and taking ages, and we're the ones who end up paying for it. I've mentioned on the show before, sorry if I'm boring people, but I did speak to a very, 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 very senior figure at the BBC a few weeks ago, and I talked about how I believe that while individual presenters I knew categorically were not anti-Semitic, and I think a lot of them wouldn't think they were, but that actually BBC is now so imbued with anti-Semitic culture, they don't even see it themselves. So when they do report on Israel or they report on stuff going on in this country, they're blind to it. They don't even see it anymore because it's so normalised. In the same way that they thought they were neutral on things like Brexit and on all these other issues, because they think that their views are the norm and are the neutral centrist dad views. This person was very angry with me. I've got to be very angry with me and very outraged that I should think this. But do you think they do actually have a serious problem there?
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, these are the fashionable opinions of the North London dinner party set, aren't they? And they feel so confident in holding these opinions because they have that own little echo chamber that goes on, as you said, around Brexit, around Israel, around the trans debate, all of these things, and it's not so much a left-right political bias, it's this metropolitan elite bias. Yeah. And they just are completely confident that those are the right views to have, because we've all been to dinner parties like that where we've heard it.
Well, I live in that world outside of this, so I'm very aware of what it is. I'm surprised they even allow me through the door. I mean, climate change being the other one, and we're going to be talking about that up next. And again, literally, I mean, people like Matt Ridley, former science correspondent for The Economist, who's written some fantastic, really science-based books, noticing stuff, basically being blacklisted from the BBC because he questions whether he accepts climate change is happening, thinks there's probably an element of man-made input to it, but doesn't believe it's a crisis and believes that net zero policies are crazy. Basically blackballed from the BBC. I'm pretty sure that's what happened to me after the last Question Time I did, having been invited on regularly on those sort of shows. I've gone beyond the pale with my views, fact-based views. I know they don't like that very much on that. And the reality is they are shutting down debate in this country.
Absolutely, because if you have views that are outside of that, dinner party, fashionable, liberal set, then you are seen as an extremist. And once you're seen as an extremist by the BBC, then they feel absolutely within their right to sort of blacklist you. And that's really dangerous thinking. And actually, it's not what the BBC is supposed to be delivering, because they have this obligation under their charter to represent all parts of the UK and to deliver journalistic excellence and not just talking to their own, their own audience.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? They do view a lot of people who disagree with them as extremists. And that's the thing. What do you make also of the MasterChef affair, the debacle? We found out last week that Greg Wallace, one of the presenters, was sacked. We've seen the report has been published yesterday, and basically says, of the basically more than half of the allegations against him had been upheld. Most of the most serious ones were not upheld in terms of touching. It definitely exposing himself. We're told by him, he has autism. He can't wear, his friends say he can't wear pants, which I find utterly ludicrous. Then they brought in John Turode, the co-presenter, into it, and he said, look, I'm the person who's named in this report, well, unnamed, but cited in this report, who used a racist word. They don't even know when it happened. Was it 2018 or was it 2019? They don't know. He doesn't remember saying it, doesn't think it happened. Apparently he used a word, possibly in a song, immediately apologised for it. The people who heard it didn't think that it was in any way malicious. But he was asked, he says, by the BBC to resign and claim mental health issues. We are into absolute mad territory here, are we not?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like there's this sort of witch hunt going on. And obviously there will be some of those complaints that are incidents that are, deeply uncomfortable for the people that were involved. But the thing is with the BBC, they've had the first complaint was raised 12 years ago. Yeah. They've known about this for all this time and they've done nothing about it. So now come out with sort of, throw him, Greg Wallace out to be sort of this evil guy. He may well be, but they've known about it for 12 years and therefore the buck stops with them.
Yeah, and again, we've got the same issue. The thing I find extraordinary is so many of these allegations are happening before 2018, before he was given a talking to, and his behaviour, by all accounts, massively changed. So why is it being brought up now? Like, what is going on there? And again, we've got the same issue where, they keep quiet about things until it becomes difficult for them, and then they throw people under the bus. You've got, Hugh Edwards, everyone senior was completely aware of his outrageous, disgusting, predatory behaviour, and no one said a sodding word. Jimmy Savile, again, absolutely people knew. We've got loads of issues where it's been cover up after cover up after cover up of often very, very, very serious predatory behaviour, sometimes sexual abuse in case of Jimmy Savile. But then, you said a word that might have been considered racist in a song possibly 6 years ago, possibly 7 years ago, you should resign. It's like they always get it wrong.
Exactly. So they go to offer the extremes on people where that's convenient for them to do that, but then they've covered up for the likes of Hugh Edwards and kept paying him hundreds of thousands of British licence fee payers money, and they still haven't got that money back yet. So it's just seemed to be this two-tier policing of their so-called talent, and this is what people are deeply uncomfortable with.
Yeah. And they're paying for it all. At midday, we're going to get, it's under embargo, we haven't been allowed to see it yet, a report, annual report into the BBC. This is when we find out what they've been spending our money on, usually the salaries of big stars. And if we're told the number, the actual total fee is going to come down because some various stars have taken big pay cuts. Gary Lineker has left now, but of course he would still have been paid his big salary. I think he was the top earning star, wasn't he, during this annual report. But what else are we likely to see in this report?
Well, I think we're probably going to see this same old, which is the sort of overspending, huge salaries for their so-called talent. And that's what makes the British licence fee payer really uncomfortable, because it would be, if they had the choice whether or not to pay for it, you do have a choice in that if you don't watch any live broadcast TV, you have to pay for the TV.
But it's like, it's none of it. I couldn't care two hoots what a Hollywood star gets paid, a footballer gets paid, or someone on ITV gets paid, because it's not my problem.
Absolutely. And so therefore, if we had that choice, then people wouldn't mind so much. But this is the thing, is we see these huge salaries, we see this huge amount of waste that comes out of the BBC, huge amount spent on their PR, on their sort of diversity targets, all of these things. And that's what really riles people.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca Ryan, I mean, good God, you know, I've always said, you know, I still want the BBC to exist. I don't want it to not exist. But I'm coming round to your way of thinking. They are making it very hard for me. Rebecca Ryan, campaign director of Defund the BBC, thank you very much. Going to go to a quick break. 11:47 is the time. I'm going to find out whether or not my guest in the studio, Tom Slater, and I, really should end up with criminal records because we don't think there's a climate emergency. That is what one of Labour's biggest donors, big mate of Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, thinks, and the Energy Secretary thinks that it's unpatriotic. Tory MPs, Reform MPs, and people like me, and probably a lot of people listening and watching as well, to not support net zero policies. You bad, bad souls, you. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Well, all attention now really focusing on the autumn budget. We know that Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise taxes to stay within those fiscal rules, which she has set herself. She can't increase borrowing day to day, and it looks like the growth is going to come and save her. So it seems that after big retreats on welfare, winter fuel allowance, downgraded productivity forecasts, it looks that she's going to have to raise taxes in some capacity. And as political journalists, we're trying to read the runes in terms of where the axe will fall.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:50 is the time. Tom Slater's still with me. He's editor of Spiked Online. Tom, I just want to clarify, are you taking the top bunk or the bottom bunk when we are sent to prison for our crimes against the climate? Because we are, I think, what we classed as climate deniers, because we're not entirely convinced there is a climate crisis and emergency that would require us spending not 800 billion, that's the latest figure, trillions on net zero policies. So which one do you want, top or bottom?
Oh, you can pick. I mean, hopefully they've sorted out the whole no men in women's prisons by the time we end up in the clink, but we shall find out. I mean, what a crazy authoritarian suggestion. This bubbles up from time to time, doesn't it? Someone on the kind of green left usually gets a bee in their bonnet about people disagreeing with them and therefore dream of them being led away in handcuffs. But for this to come from quite a prominent Labour donor, I mean, it does raise a lot of questions about, is this the sort of thing that a lot of people at the top of this government actually kind of agree with, but no, they couldn't get away with?
This is Dale Vince, and he's a prominent Labour donor. He's making an awful lot of money from the green. Well, it's amazing how many people who feel strongly about this tend to make a lot of money from green energy, don't they? But he has called for people to be basically criminalised for saying for denying climate change, being a climate denier. I've never understood the climate denier thing. Never made sense to me. This as Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, who was partly funded by by Dale Vince, that he has said that it is unpatriotic of people like some Tory MPs, Reform MPs, to say that they oppose net zero policies, when he says, Ed Miliband, that the climate crisis is the biggest threat to the British way of life. Well, let's talk about this all with Donica McCarthy. He's director of the Climate Media Coalition. Good morning to you, Donica.
Good morning, Julia. I'm not funding David Miliband, I assure you.
Well, that's good to know. Donica, should Tom Slater, should many of our audience, people who are climate deniers in this ridiculous race, should we be criminalised for saying that we don't believe there's a climate crisis?
Absolutely not. I think over the last 5-10 years, we've got to a ridiculous situation where people on both sides of the political divides are calling for each other to be criminalised for
No, you see, this is like the trans debate where people say there's only... I'd never heard of anyone...
You asked me a question and let me answer.
No, Donica, this is the difficulty we always have. I ask you a question and then you say something that's completely untrue.
No, you say something you disagree with. That's why you...
Who has been calling for climate change activists who are simply saying what they think to be criminalised? Who's been saying that? Who? Give me one example.
Julia, I said people on both sides of the political divide have been calling each other for being in jailed.
No, they haven't.
Let me finish, please. People who actually who were right-wing calling on the riots have been jailed for a ridiculous amount of times. I agree with you on that.
That's not for words, that's for breaking the law.
Likewise, people who actually last week came out and said they support Palestine action have been jailed for free speech.
For breaking the law.
No, for
breaking the law.
So you're actually, so what Dale Vincent is doing is the exact same thing as the Zionists are doing. They're calling for criminalisation of those who oppose them. We must be fair, Julia. I'm actually in favour of free speech for both sides. I am not in favour of criminalising you. I am not in favour of criminalising people who support Palestine action. Okay. And I'm not in favour of people who support the Zionists.
I love the way you say that word. Okay, again, and this is the problem. Just like Greta, the far left green activists have moved seamlessly to hating Israel.
I'm a former deputy chair of the Liberal Democrats. I'm a Liberal. I'm not.
Yeah, well, you think you are. The Liberals are further left than the Labour Party as well, you know now. I voted Liberal Democrat many times when they were sane, but they're not anymore. Here's the thing. Okay, this is the classic thing. You say it's happened on both sides. It hasn't happened on both sides. There's a very big... Donica, there's a very big difference between saying...
People arrested last week for their free speech.
Donica, Donica, when there is a specific law that prevents people from supporting prescribed terrorist organisations, that is different from someone saying, I don't believe in net zero policies.
There's doublespeak. Well, look, if there was a law saying it was illegal to deny climate science, that would mean that people like you would be breaking the law, and I would completely oppose that.
Yes, but the difference is me saying there isn't a climate change crisis would not be I suppose the argument from Dale Vince and possibly even Ed Miliband in private, I'm guessing, would be that actually I was a threat to the British way of life, like unpatriotic, apparently, MPs who said that net zero policies are insane. I would be a threat to the British people, because if you do believe, and do you believe that, like Ed Miliband, that climate change, man-made climate change, is the biggest threat to the British way of life?
Well, scientists all over the world, oil companies, scientists and the military have all stated this is one of the top threats to human security. The National Farmers Union in Wales has said, quote unquote, they cannot guarantee a stable food supply because of the extreme weather that is now endemic in the UK. The Met Office report last week, which Ed Miliband was quoting, has stated that we have had the driest spring and we have the wettest winter. Farmers find it really difficult to grow food since records began.
When did records begin?
UK has the longest records.
Yes, when did they begin?
Going back to the 18th century.
Yes.
And if you look at the fossil record going back 800,000 years, we are at the highest CO2 in 800,000 years. Scientists in the oil companies predicted in the noughties, carbon dioxide being burnt by fossil fuels would start impacting our environment, but we wouldn't
I hate to tell you that in the 1970s they thought we were going to enter an ice age. That was considered to be
oil company Exxon, Shell, and BP signed.
I thought you wouldn't trust those sort of people. I thought you'd think they were lying. Here's the thing.
They stated that by the 2020s our climate would be damaged.
Here's the thing. Even if, and okay, the climate changes. I accept the climate changes. I don't deny there is a climate. I don't deny the climate changes. Okay, but even if it is largely, if not just, if it's tiny bit of man-made or if it's largely man-made, even if it is, the benefits of fossil fuels and the longer life and the better life that is given the billions of people on this planet and our ability to produce food for all the people, etc., to me vastly outweigh any concerns about the weather heating up in largely, let me finish, the northern hemisphere as it's been so far. Is it not a better case that we should be spending time mitigating these things? So more flood defences, which makes more sense, so we can, we've already massively cut the number of people who are dying from things like floods, and by the way, floods aren't increasing. Those are official figures. But if we simply had cheaper, reliable fuel made from fossil fuels, and we could afford air conditioning, we wouldn't be bothered by a hot summer, would we?
I don't think you can go to the Welsh Farmers Union and say you're going to air condition the entire agricultural land.
I think they could probably get cheaper water and get more water and not face hosepipe bans as we've seen in some rural areas.
And as regards
built some reservoirs.
I think the ultimate duty of a government is to protect our borders. The Met Office said as sea level rise is already 20 centimetres.
Over what time period?
Since over the last century.
Okay, yeah.
20 centimetres.
And the sea apparently is rising in different amounts in different parts of the country, which is weird because that's not really how water works. It's actually a lot of the time is that the ground is sinking, isn't it?
It's actually scientific. You're right. You're right. The south of England is rising and the north of Britain is sinking because of 20,000 years ago the ice caps melted. So therefore the land is rebalancing. However, the measure said sea level
to do with climate change.
And cities like Peterborough are facing flooding by 2030. So it's this patriotic thing to do.
I remember reports saying London would be underwater by about 2030. It's not looking like that's happening either. The reality is the scaremongering doesn't work. British people have had enough of it. They don't want to have energy bills that are sky high. They don't want to be told that a lovely summer's day is a problem, and they just don't buy it anymore, do they, Donica?
Why is London not underwater when there's high tides? It's because we built flood defences and they're not.
Oh, so we can mitigate.
Well, the cost of protecting London is billions.
Cheaper than getting rid of fossil fuels, though, eh?
You can't build a London Thames barrier across the entire UK.
And we won't need to. But I mean, look, time is always against us, Donica. It's always exhausting, I think, on both sides, and indeed for the audience. Coming up, we are going to be talking to Bill Browder about Vladimir Putin. We're also going to be talking to the father of a girl banned from school for wearing a Union Jack dress. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show, or welcome if you're just tuning in. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is absolutely great to have your company. Also delightful to have the company of Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online as well. Lots more top guests coming up in the show. Up next, we're going to be talking to Sir Bill Browder, well, basically Vladimir Putin's public enemy #1, about what appears to be a big change in policy from Donald Trump, announced in the White House yesterday regarding Ukraine and Russia. We're also going to be speaking to the father of a schoolgirl who was sent home from her school's Cultural Diversity Day. This is called Diversity Day. Why? Because she wore a Union Jack dress and hat. 12-year-old Courtney Wright planned to read a speech celebrating drinking tea, Shakespeare, fish and chips and the royals. She was told by teachers, though, you get to celebrate being British every day. This is for everybody else, and was sent out of the classroom. I kid you not. We will talk to her father in about 20 minutes' time. Also going to be talking to a friend of the show, Sharon Davies, ex-Olympian, of course, herself, about the sporting bodies who've been told that they will face legal action if they don't get with the programme and follow the Supreme Court ruling on, well, trans women are not women, they are men. And if they fail to ban trans-identifying men from women's sports, they will face legal action. Let's get that sorted. Well, we'll talk about all of that. First up there, I must just bring you the details of the BBC's annual report. From what we already know, they just released a report in the last few moments. And according to the latest annual report, and it's nothing but reports about the BBC, this is their internal annual report, which they send out, obviously, every year. Yeah, you guessed it. Tim Davie, the Director General, has apparently had a £15,000 pay rise. He's now on £540,000, despite a load of these controversies. I'm assuming that's a something sort of around low inflation number. Gary Lineker ended his time at the BBC. Of course, he left this year, but of course this relates to the last year. He was still top of the pay league table for the 8th consecutive year on £1.35 million. It's interesting, more than half of the top 20 earners at the BBC are from BBC News, which, of course, where we've seen so many of the controversies in terms of bias and issues there. Naga Munchetti has had a £10,000 pay rise. She's now on £355,000 for her BBC Breakfast show and various other shows she does. While her co-presenter, Charlie State, stays on £190,000. I assume, therefore, Tom, that Charlie State will be suing the BBC for sexism in the pay realm. Of course, you know, again, a lot of people would just be flabbergasted about a number of these figures. We've also had a statement from the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, talking about this series of scandals, particularly you've got Greg Wallace and others, and he says there was no place for inappropriate behaviour at the corporation in the wake of a series of scandals. He said this is a time of transition for the industry, a reset, and the changes we are driving are overdue. The reality is there's always been a place for inappropriate behaviour at the corporation. It keeps going on until the next one is exposed, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things where if they'd have responded to this earlier, then this wouldn't have snowballed into the huge problem that it is.
Ta-da.
Is it that difficult? I understand, you know, the talent get what they want, the kind of things you get away with here, Julia, you know, it boggles the mind, frankly.
Quite, it does.
You know,
do I get away
just
with
the exposure I get to it. But it's one of those things where you do think that if they don't want all of these scandals, maybe they should just tell someone who is insisting on making outrageous sex jokes at 9 o'clock in the morning that maybe you tone it down.
Do it at 11 a.m.
Is that so difficult? Yeah, maybe after lunch, Greg. Once everyone's settled into the day a little bit,
it
please.
Is interesting. We've just had a statement from Samir Shah. He's the chairman of the BBC, and he said the BBC still has pockets of bad behaviour. He says where powerful people make life, in his words, unbearable for others. He says the BBC is a wonderful place to work. Our staff are dedicated, hard-working, treat each other with respect. However, there are pockets in the organisation where this is not the case. There are still places where powerful individuals on and off screen can abuse that power to make life for their colleagues unbearable. Well, But why are they allowing that to carry on happening? Because again, with all these cases, when you go back to Jimmy Savile, Hugh Edwards, all these, I mean, they're all these very, very different kinds of cases, or all these allegations against Greg Wallace. The reality is, senior people have always known.
But also, we have to put these things in a bit of perspective, don't we? Because like what Greg Wallace, the vast majority of the allegations which have been substantiated, and this isn't any criminal process, it's a law firm looking into it for a production company, involve him just making lewd, offensive.
There's a few of him getting his todger out.
Comments, exactly. And
I have managed to go through my entire working life without showing my genitals to any colleagues.
It really shouldn't.
I think most of us manage that.
It really shouldn't be that difficult. But I do find it a little bit strange that what is in large part, at least from what we know, boorish behaviour has been. Allowed to go on for so long. That it should have earned him at the very least a rap on the knuckles a lot earlier on than it did. But also the fact that this is the big story, whereas the other report which came out yesterday into the outrageous production and airing of that documentary, despite the fact it was fronted by the son of a Hamas official, you do think that maybe sometimes our priorities are a little bit off. This is a big celebrity story, it works brilliantly on the front page, but at the same time, does it ask as many searching questions about the BBC, its failure to report properly on the big conflict, one of the big conflicts of our time? I think I know where our focus probably should be.
Right, well, just a breaking news. Apologies to our guest, Bill Browder. We'll get to you. Just promise it just a moment. But an unprecedented super injunction has been lifted in the last few moments in relation to Afghans who supported British forces, many translators who were able, many we know still stuck back in Afghanistan, but many able to come to this country as a result of working as interpreters and helping British forces in Afghanistan, having to flee when the Taliban took over. But thousands of Afghans are being relocated to the UK as part of a secret £850 million scheme set up after a leak of personal data of those who supported British forces. So those who have not actually already in the country and made safe, but actually being able to be relocated here to the UK because of that leak of personal data, presumably by data that was held by the MOD, but a highly secretive mission codenamed Operation Rubific launched to shut down the leak and stop the details of the breach becoming public. And some £7 billion of taxpayers' money has been earmarked to handle the fallout, which included the biggest covert evacuation operation in peacetime. This was after as in February 2022, a soldier inadvertently sent a list of tens of thousands of names to Afghans as he tried to help verify applications for sanctuary in Britain. A database of 33,000 records was then passed on, and one of the individuals who received it was threatened to publish the data set on Facebook. We'll give you more on that as we get it. Right, lots going on today, as you can hear. Let's turn our attention to another major conflict, leaving aside what's going on in Gaza, what happened in Afghanistan, and let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine, because we did see that announcement from Donald Trump yesterday in the White House of what appears to be a game-changing volte-face when it comes to his attitudes, not just towards Ukraine, supplying weapons, some £10 billion in the first tranche of high-tech weapons, including Patriot missiles, to EU members of NATO, for them, selling them to the EU, for them to pass on to Ukraine to fight Russian forces, but also giving a 50-day ultimatum to Vladimir Putin to sign a peace deal. And if he doesn't, he'll face tariffs, and so will those countries like India and China, who are purchasing his oil and basically funding his war effort in Ukraine. Well, let's talk about all of this now with Sir Bill Browder. He's, well, effectively Putin's #1 foreign enemy. He's the head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign and has been fighting for many years for the West to take action against Vladimir Putin. Very good afternoon to you, Sir Bill.
Great to be here.
Apologies for keeping you waiting. Lots of breaking news coming in at midday. So, Bill, just first of all, your initial reaction to what Donald Trump said in terms of funding for Ukraine, or funding the weapons for Ukraine, paid for by the EU, but actually sending those weapons over, first tranche under his actual, his presidency, authorised by him and not by Joe Biden in the past, but also this ultimatum to Vladimir Putin.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, first of all, I should say, as a big supporter of Ukraine, I'm relieved that they're going to get some Patriot missiles, because they're being bombarded by literally 500 to 700 projectiles, missiles, drones, etc., coming in every day into civilian neighborhoods, killing, maiming totally innocent Ukrainians. Yeah. It's a terrible thing. So the fact that Ukraine is getting these weapons is really important. I should point out that the U.S. was supplying Patriot missiles and so on under a decision by Biden, and that was cut off. a few weeks ago. So this is not as if there's some major new initiative to help Ukraine. This is just restarting what was happening before, and someone else is paying for it. So I don't think we should be, cheering and saying, "Oh my God, Donald Trump has switched sides. He's now a big friend of Ukraine." He's just switched back on what has been a U.S. policy up until now. I imagine he's been under a lot of pressure from a lot of his Republican congressional allies like Lindsey Graham, who's a big friend of Ukraine. And it is a huge relief for anybody who cares about Ukraine that they're getting these defensive weapons. They may be getting offensive weapons. We don't know the breakdown. If they do get offensive weapons, that would be a big step in the right direction. Who pays for it? Well, I guess this is Trump's big political thing, which is he didn't want to pay for anything more, and so the Europeans will pay for it. The interesting part of this whole story, which hasn't yet, the new chapter that hasn't yet been opened, is do the Europeans, does the EU and the UK and other countries finally confiscate the $300 billion of Russian money that's been frozen and use that money to pay for these weapons? Because that would be a lot more sensible than paying for it out of our own pocket.
Absolutely. I mean, again, something you've been calling for a very long time, something I would absolutely support. It is very interesting that Donald Trump has actually asked President Zelensky in one of his phone calls if Ukraine was capable of striking Moscow, as he encouraged more long-range strikes inside Russia. We've seen those drone attacks, and we've seen some very successful attacks by Ukraine, some rather audacious strikes taking out some key weaponry. But it seems to say, I mean, we seem to be seeing both sides from Donald Trump. His good friend Vladimir Putin, who may now be, he might be someone he doesn't trust, but saying he wants peace, but then calling on the Ukrainians to strike into the heart of Russia.
Well, I mean, and that's been part of this, part of his policy towards Russia and Ukraine since the very beginning, is it's just this crazy ambiguity. If you remember, literally on the day he was inaugurated, he issued a statement saying if Putin doesn't negotiate, then he's going to face tariffs, taxes, and sanctions. That was his big threat on the day that he was inaugurated. And then, of course, there was the whole big, I want a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, 30-day unconditional ceasefire, which Ukraine agreed to. And then Putin started dancing around and playing games and making up fake negotiations and so on and so forth. And so, again, I wouldn't all of a sudden say, oh my God, Trump has become, anti-Putin. I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, what is this 50 days? Why 50 days? Why not 2 weeks? Why not 1 day? 50 days is a long time.
Well, especially, as you say, Vladimir Putin said he was going to ramp up for 60 days. We're now sort of about 10 days into that. So, yeah, off you go. Carry on striking hospitals and old people's homes and civilian areas. By the way, everyone's very up in arms about the IDF doing this in Gaza. Not so bothered about it happening in Ukraine on a daily basis. And he spoke very specifically about how he would say to his wife, Melania, in the White House yesterday, I had a really good conversation with Vladimir Putin, and then we're going to get to a deal. And she said, well, that's funny because he's just hit a hospital or an old people's home, and you think, okay, well, this doesn't all tally. It's sort of he's going to allow another 50 more days of that with, as you say, massively ramped up attacks. But the attacks are on a sort of at least double the level they were on a year ago. This war is getting worse, not better.
Yeah, so that 50-day limitation is inexplicable, and then what he does at the end of the 50 days is also very odd. So there's a piece of legislation that is waiting in the wings from the U.S. Senate, which was sponsored by Trump's ally, Lindsey Graham, which says that the U.S. will impose 500% tariffs on anybody who buys Russian oil, India, China, Turkey, etc. And that piece of legislation has 84 Senate co-sponsors. 84 people out of 100 have co-sponsored that legislation. And that was...
So tell us what that would actually mean and who it would apply to.
Well, basically, nobody would buy Russian oil anymore. Yeah. If you're China, you don't want to be sanctioned by 500% on all your other goods to buy a bit of Russian oil. You just won't buy Russian oil. Same thing with India. People will just avoid it. Yeah. And if Russia doesn't sell oil, Russia's out of business.
I mean, it's basically there's oil and gas sales are propping up the war effort, propping up the entire economy. One of the extraordinary things that Vladimir Putin has done as a kleptocratic leader is he's never diversified the Russian economy, so they are completely reliant on the oil price. But this is one of the things, and one of the abject failures of the economic sanctions. And I know you were instrumental in advising a lot of the NATO countries about how to actually go about these economic sanctions against Vladimir Putin. That we say, well, okay, well, when you can't buy our cars, we won't buy your oil, but India and China are buying it at cut price very, very happily. We sometimes even have it then shipped to us. We won't sell any cars to Russia, but we'll sell them to Kazakhstan, and suddenly Kazakhstan's sales of cars to Russia have gone up massively, and their purchases from us. They're getting the stuff they want anyway, and they're getting the money they want anyway. Is that an abject failure of will, or just utter incompetence on the part of the West?
Well, I would say it's slightly different. That it's a sort of a cynical decision that the West wants to be seen to be doing something, but doesn't actually want to do something, because cutting off Russian oil will create higher oil prices. And so the West wants to say, well, sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. But there's this elephant in the room, which is their export of oil. Russia makes between $200 and $300 billion a year selling Russian oil. Yeah. And they're spending that money on bombing Ukraine. And then we're spending a bunch of money helping Ukraine fight back. Yeah. And so, someone's got to bite the bullet. And this piece of legislation sponsored by Lindsey Graham, 500% tariffs, which, again, as I said, was sponsored by 84 out of 100 senators. It will be passed with unanimity. And that would put Putin out of business. And so this idea of 50 days, 100% tariffs, maybe, and then we also get into the whole, do we trust Trump to hold the line? Because he sure hasn't held the line when it comes to his other threats on tariffs. And so I think it's very suboptimal from the Ukrainian standpoint. Of course, Zelensky's putting on a brave face. He's thanking Trump. Yes. And so on and so forth.
But it's about the direction of travel. A lot of people are saying it's very interesting. The NATO Secretary General sitting next to Donald Trump when he made these statements initially in the White House, Mark Rutte, who was chosen largely because he's an operator and he had a good rapport with Donald Trump. It seems to me that the Western leaders are just and indeed I imagine also Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and others sort of sensible people within the administration are just very slowly trying to persuade Trump that his stance on Vladimir Putin and Ukraine is the wrong one. Again, you've got extreme MAGA people who are very opposed to any help for Ukraine, but the vast majority of American people clearly, as anyone who's sensible, who pays attention, can see that Ukraine is the wronged party here. But you're one of the few men in the world who talk about this issue who actually knows Vladimir Putin. You knew him very well. You were the biggest single investor, in terms of, the money markets in Russia. Your reason why you started the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign was after your own lawyer was imprisoned and then murdered behind bars for standing up to the incredibly corrupt Putin regime. Why do you think Donald Trump has been convinced, as he clearly has been, that Vladimir Putin is a man he can do business with, that he is someone who is trustworthy, who is someone who is in somehow not the aggressor in the Ukraine war? How has he got to that position, and what do you think has partly in some way changed his mind?
Well, first of all, there's a million different theories about why he's doing what he's doing. And in the moment you start engaging in these theories, you become a conspiracy theorist, you become a Trump derangement syndrome person, you become a Russian hoax person. But so I'm not going to engage in why he's doing it. All we can see is that he is doing it, and it's very upsetting for any reasonable person to watch. And of course, the most upsetting thing was watching what happened in the Oval Office when J.D. Vance and Donald Trump ganged up on Vladimir Zelensky, the hero standing up against Vladimir Putin. But what we have to do now is use whatever levers we have to help Ukraine. And to the extent that Donald Trump may be moving in that direction, and let's see, I'd be glad to give him the benefit of the doubt. If he is going to be coming down like a ton of bricks in 50 days, great. If he is going to supply offensive long-range missiles to Ukraine, even better. But at the end of the day, what we've seen so far has been very disturbing. It's been, cutting off Patriot missiles a few weeks ago, cutting off intelligence, military intelligence to Ukraine for a brief period of time, talking about Ukraine having to pay back all the money that was given in military aid. Yeah. the shameful minerals deal, which everyone has forgotten about. I mean, all this stuff is really very unpleasant, and hopefully, you know, for whatever reason he's making his decisions, he comes to the right place. I'll praise him if he comes to the right place, but at the moment, I'm still very questioning of whether, first of all, he's going to come down like a ton of bricks, like he says, in 50 days, by 50 days, what's going to happen during those 50 days, etc.
Indeed. Can I ask you just finally, Sir Bill Browder, lots of people will be saying, and I think a lot of Americans have said over the years, and lots of Brits as well, saying, why is this our war? This isn't our problem. It's not our country. It's a long way away, even from Britain. Why are we getting involved? We don't need to ramp up our defence. We certainly don't need to be supplying weapons. Don't want to get dragged into World War III. What would you say to those people?
Well, we will be in World War III if Ukraine doesn't hold Russia back. Putin is in this war not because he needs some sliver of Ukraine or even Ukraine in the whole. He needs this war in order to have a foreign enemy to stay in power. And if he gets Ukraine, then he's going to move on Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, possibly Poland. And they're our NATO allies. And do we want to be at war directly with Russia? Or do we want to support the Ukrainians who are fighting him off very valiantly? And I would say that I don't want my sons and daughters on the front line fighting Putin. I'd rather have the Ukrainians do it, and they're doing it, and all they are asking us for is a bit of money and a bit of kit. And we should give that to them instead of having our own blood on our hands because we were too weak to stand up to Vladimir Putin.
Sir Bill Browder, always appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you very much indeed, head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Let's come to Tom Slater, listening to all of that. I think you and I are in very similar territory when it comes to the need to protect Ukraine. It still amazes me that so many people don't get it. I'm amazed that people who think about America making American number one and British pride are not in favour of supporting a country that has been invaded by what is clearly a hostile enemy state.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think part of the problem is that people aren't just sceptical of, backing a foreign country as it's defending itself against an outrageous invasion. They've actually imbibed a really warped version of the truth here. Not many people, but enough to be influential, certainly at the top of the White House. The idea that Ukraine was essentially the aggressor, the idea that this was entirely as a result of Western provocation, as if Russia has no agency in this whatsoever. And that's unfortunately really warped the debate, particularly in America, because whilst that's not a majority position amongst the American electorate, it's certainly influential enough in the circles that Trump operates in that it's made getting through this a real mess. But I think we're now coming to the point where he's realised that Ukraine is not the aggressor, that Vladimir Putin is not a good faith actor, to put it lightly, and that he doesn't want to look like an idiot, which he has been made to look like an idiot in the way that Putin has managed to kind of manoeuvre him.
And he really has. I mean, that's the embarrassing bit. If I were an American, my president's looking like a chump. He really, really is at this, and it's quite embarrassing, isn't it? Love to hear your thoughts on this. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Also, your thoughts about the BBC. We've just had the new annual report. Basically, Tim Davie, the Director General, saying he can lead the BBC in the right way. This is, we've had Samir Shah, the Chairman of the BBC, saying powerful people at the BBC have made life unbearable and are still doing so. A few people. I mean, it is just extraordinary. They admit that. I mean, and everyone knows who those people are, and they're only ever ousted when someone, a newspaper or someone else exposes what is going on. We've got the Greg Wallace scandal. We've got the Gaza documentary presented by a Hamas official's son. We've had Bob Villan shouting death chants to the IDF at Glastonbury, and no one thinking, we should probably pull the plug on that. I want to know, do you trust the BBC? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talking your message to 87222. Text cost one standard network rate message, and the calls are charged at the national rate. Love to hear your thoughts on what we just discussed with Sir Bill Browder. Actually, also, do you think that Donald Trump is coming round to realising that Putin has made him look a fool? I'm going to end the Ukraine war on day one. Well, you didn't. You won't. You're not going to get a peace deal with Vladimir Putin unless Vladimir Putin knows he's going to lose. Otherwise, he is going to demand as his basic requirement of peace that he gets pretty much anything he wants in Ukraine. Is this president looking like a fool? I think he has been looking like a fool, but if he's turning it around and he's coming round to the fact that Vladimir Putin is the enemy and not his friend, that's a good thing, right? Give us a call. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
he never does press conferences, never talks to hacks like you and I, Mike. You know, he a bit of quizzing. You know, that's his job.
Yeah.
I think he's skating on a very thin ice at the moment.
I think he's looking closer to the end than he's ever looked this week.
I'm afraid there's an element of truth to that. Tim is a friend, and he's done a very good job. But you know, I think too many mistakes, too many things have ended up at his doorstep, and that's because he doesn't have a flat catcher. Amongst other, and also the systems are all there, but who's putting the system into operation?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Let me read you some of the messages we're getting in on the BBC. We're going to go back to that breaking news about Afghans. After all these scandals involving the BBC, I'm asking, do you trust the BBC? Julie says, one of the main reasons why we don't have a TV licence, don't watch live TV. Great for our mental health and even better for our bank balance. Jane says, I didn't before, ever since they've been fully captured by lefty woke ideology. The latest scandals have merely cemented my opinion. And Jenny says, my trust was lost in the BBC, the British bashing corruption long ago. Steve says, nope, the BBC is an activist, extremist, left-wing, regressive entity, pioneering non-science with climate change, COVID, gender ideology, regressive and pernicious, direct DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-white racism with BLM. It's a cesspit of anti-British views. I've got to be honest with you, I don't think I could disagree with a single word of that anymore. Tim says, I've just been asked to renew my TV licence, but I now feel like I'm funding a terrorist organisation that's opposed to the British way of life. And Sally says, oh, deep joy, we pay a licence fee and yet the scandal continues. Money well spent? Well, someone is doing well, but it isn't the licence-paying public. That's a fact. Wow. People, Tom Slater, are not feeling the love for the BBC, which used to be, and again, it's interesting, like people's faith in the BBC, people's faith in the NHS. It's amazing how much these things can be just broken. And these are things that are built up over so many years. And we know where our money is going. It's going on a lot of these high earners. Gary Lineker's now left the BBC, but after 8 years, still he was the highest earner at 1.35 million. That's according to the annual report that came out in the last half an hour. Over half of the top 20 earners were from BBC News. They include Fiona Bruce, Nick Robinson, Stephen Nolan, Laura Kunzberg, Justin Webb and Naga Munchetti on a variety of salaries ranging from about the 350 grand mark to the 410 grand mark. But Zoe Ball, she's had a big pay cut. I think she cut her hours or changed her hours, didn't she? Alan Shearer, Greg James, other big names on that list. But even Tim Davey, the Director General, he's had a little bit of a pay rise. But I mean, the key thing is that there is just no trust left in the BBC. And it's that feeling that people feel that it's wagging its finger at you. It's not representing British people's views. It's anti-British. It's sort of trans and queer ideology being pushed down your throats non-stop. Everything is about race. Everything's about climate change. You can't watch a documentary about wildlife now without a little lecture about climate change and we're all going to die. I mean, it just becomes intolerable. I mean, even David Attenborough, I'm sorry, I used to think he was wonderful. He's completely captured by this madness. I can't watch anything that he does anymore. And people, the Brexit bias, even the fact they've suddenly discovered last week that apparently there are channel migrants on boats, and mentioning that isn't actually racist, it's a fact, where they castigated Nigel Farage for it. The way they talk about anyone who has views which are basically to the right of the Socialist Party is just extraordinary, and they are just utterly out of touch with everything that the majority of not just our audience, the majority of British people think.
I mean, it's staggering. This is the problem about public trust, is it takes a long time to build up and it can be lost very quickly. And I think the BBC is going through that at the moment. The BBC has always been run by a group of people who are not very representative of ordinary British society, but there was still a little bit of a sense of you need to meet the audience where they are, that you need to understand that a lot of people who are watching the news or watching all the entertainment content, whatever it might be, are potentially of a different view, that you need to try and kind of speak to as broad an audience as possible.
Or maybe just not push your political views.
No,
that's
absolutely.
a mad idea.
And that's something that has just completely evaporated in the past few years. People saw it with Brexit, people saw it with COVID, people saw it with the war in Gaza, all these. Everyone has their kind of story could have been the gender issue, of the point in which they kind of realised that
done now.
This institution that supposedly is supposed to be impartial, that's supposed to stand above the fray, that is supposed to be able to talk to the nation as a whole rather than these kind of, hermetically sealed identity groups, has just been failing to do that. These whenever the kind of pay figures come out, it wouldn't be particularly controversial if people had faith in the institution in general. They do have a point when they say people often are not taking the going rate if they're at the top level of their game presenter.
But they have much more job security at the BBC.
Oh, no,
and they also get a lot of extra work on top of that.
There are huge layers of
20
benefits.
grand for presenting an awards ceremony.
It would be a kind of academic, it would be a discussion to a certain extent if people trusted the institution. They just don't. And that's a growing problem, and it's happening, I'm sure you've noticed this, to more and more constituencies. There's the Brexit voting working class has been very put off in recent years, shall we say, although that has been going on for a long time. But the gender issue drove a wedge. The Israel issue has continued to drive a wedge for many years now. So it's almost like it's like the BBC is going out of its way to infuriate one section of the public after another. Yeah. And that's doing a very good job of, at the very least, you could
say. Absolutely. Well, they tell you they never want to offend. That's the welfare classes. They're always on their side, always on. They can always find a very, very, very fat woman telling us she's had to miss meals because she's at a food bank because she can't feed her children because she hasn't got enough welfare. They always manage to find one of them. That's their constituents now. That's all they're representing, that and the North London dinner party class as well. 12:33 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to a man who I'm sure is exactly the sort of person the BBC would despise because his daughter went to school last week wearing an outfit to show, diversity, on a diversity day, to show her culture and for our diversity day. What she chose was a Union Jack dress and Union Jack hat because her culture is British, because she's British. She lives in Britain. She's at school in Britain. What happened to her? She was sent home from school. We're going to talk to Stuart Field, the dad, up next. Stay tuned.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much, dear, for joining me. Tom Slater's still with us. And now we're going to talk about, there's lovely days that schools do when they're not having a Pride March, as most schools seem to spend most of their time doing, or celebrating various different festivals from around the world. Often they now have cultural diversity days. Well, that's exactly what a school in Warwickshire did, the Bilton School in Rugby, last week. They invited all pupils to come in to celebrate their cultural diversity, maybe wear national dress, give a little talk about their cultural identity. Well, one girl did just that, but she was sent home from school because it wasn't the correct cultural identity. Well, let's talk to her father, Stuart Field, who joins us now. A very good afternoon to you, Stuart.
Hi there.
Thank you very much, Steve, for joining us. Now, you're the dad of Courtney Wright. She's just 12 years old. She's at the school, and she was told, basically, like all the other kids, come in, represent your culture. What did Courtney do?
So she was really excited. She came home a few days before with a letter saying that she was going to take part in a cultural diversity day at school. She wanted to pick her own dress. She's quite an independent young girl. She's very intelligent, and she's
a straight A pupil, isn't she?
She is. She's always been, top of the class. She's a really good kid. But she made her own mind up that she wanted to take part. She decided on her own dress, and she also wanted to sort of go online and create her own speech. She did all that. We had to sign a letter to the school to say that she was going to take part. She went into school, and I had a phone call an hour from work from Courtney saying that she wasn't allowed into school, that had been isolated and sat out.
And what was she wearing that meant that she was not allowed into school?
He was wearing you would say a typical Jerry Halliwell sort of stroke Spice Girls Union Jack dress with a bowl hat,
Yeah, I mean, outrageous. I mean, an outrageous outfit. I mean, she's basically dressed as a Ku Klux Klan, isn't she? I don't know if we've got a picture of Courtney, which with our colleagues at The Sun have got, of her wearing the outfit she wanted to wear. I think we've also got a picture of me wearing Courtney looks much better than I do, by the way, wearing my Union Jack dress in Parliament Square on the night we left the European Union, which I delight in putting out every year on anniversaries, because people seem to be remarkably bothered by people celebrating our national flag. I would have thought that on a day celebrating cultural diversity, one of the cultures one would definitely want to celebrate in a diverse country would be British culture, which is the dominant culture of our land. So what did the teachers say was wrong about her outfit?
They didn't really give me an answer as to what was wrong with the outfit. They pretty much sort of diverted me straight to we need to speak to somebody else who's better qualified to deal with this, when I was answering the question, which is give me a reason why my daughter's sat in isolation on a cultural diversity day wearing a Union Jack dress. I couldn't get my head around the reasoning behind it. I don't think the school were prepared for it. I pretty much took her out of there pretty quick and said, this is to be continued, and we will take it further. But
the thing is, she had prepared a little speech. I mean, and other kids, presumably they were. I mean, is it a particularly culturally diverse school? Lots of kids hailing from different nationalities.
Yeah.
So lots of different kids dressed up in what sort of other outfits were there, as far as you're aware?
As far as I know, I only know of the ones a few that got sort of refused entry. So I know there was a little boy. The parents aren't too keen on sharing it, but they've asked me. They've said that I can share that they're from a farming background.
Yeah.
He was dressed in a check shirt. He had a flat cap. He was dressed as a farmer, his farming background, and he was refused entry at the gates. For the children with.
I mean, it's just mind-blowing. It was just, again, so British farming, so 51% of the food we eat in this country comes from that. It's part of long-standing British culture, part of people fly over our country. You know you're over Britain straight away, don't you? Because you can see the way the countryside is there, the hedgerows. You just know you're over British countryside. It's a big part of our national heritage. But that apparently was offensive.
You could pretty much identify you were talking to a British farmer anywhere in the world by what they were wearing. It's quite an iconic, the check shirt and the flat cap.
He was dressed as Caleb from Clarkson's Farm, wasn't he? But it's interesting, your daughter, what she'd planned to read. Now, some people, the usual suspects, probably everyone at the BBC would go, oh, well, what was Courtney Wright going to say? Wearing her Union flag hat and her Union flag dress, what was she going to say? Now, she'd actually prepared a speech, and it was all about celebrating drinking tea, eating fish and chips, Shakespeare, the royals. She was talking about a load of the things that people talk about as, the most quintessentially British things. It was a joyful, positive speech about nice things in this country. And there's nothing remotely controversial or supposedly offensive in that.
No, it was a really good speech, and I think the sad thing about this was I don't think the teachers were interested in the speech or her going in. She was pretty much refused. I think if they'd have actually read the speech, it may have been different, but she was just told no right from the beginning. It wasn't anything to do with British culture. It was made clear that wasn't, it wasn't going to happen that day. It was about other cultures. And I do believe one of the teachers even turned around to her and said, "You're British, you don't get to celebrate being British because you get to celebrate that every day by eating fish and chips and wearing tracksuits, apparently." So,
wow. Wow,
yeah.
Fairly disparaging, but also, by the way, untrue, because people are constantly told they're not allowed to. I mean, it is extraordinary. The head, Jane Delves of the school, this is Bilton School in Rugby in Warwickshire, she'd written to head parents saying, I have to read it in this voice because this is the kind of voice I can hear it in. "This special day is dedicated to recognising and celebrating the rich cultural diversity within our school community. Students across all year groups will have the opportunity to take part in a variety of cultural activities." I mean, now they have written to you to say they deeply regret the distress this has caused. They've offered their sincere and unreserved apologies. And they say they reflect how this could have been handled better. They're committed to learning from this experience and ensuring every student feels recognised and supported. How much do you trust that apology, Stuart?
Yes, it's for me. Courtney got an apology. She's a child. She would be happy with it. For me as a parent, I'd like to know how far this actually goes around other schools across the country, because people have reached out to me from all over the country since this has gone. It's gone a bit crazy over the past few days, and the messages I've received from people who have been going through the same thing, or their children have been treated in a similar way in schools, and it's shocking. It's not a one-off thing. This is happening at schools all over the country. British children are being numbed to the feeling proud of being part of their culture, and
that's the thing. We're told we should celebrate all cultures as being equal, which is not something I believe. Actually, I believe our culture is one of the most superior cultures. It's why people want to come to us, and we're not all moving to some of the countries that some of the diverse children at that school's parents or grandparents or themselves will have come from. They're choosing to come here. There's a reason why, but also this idea that you can celebrate every other culture, everything else, or every other tradition or religious festival, but not British ones. So it's when, bonfire night, they say, well, let's celebrate a religious festival that happens to be at the same time, or any of our major events. There's an element where a lot of people in teaching they're a bit embarrassed, a bit ashamed of British identity, British traditions, British history and British culture. Do you think that's the same? Oh, have we frozen? I think we may have frozen. Might have lost the Stuart Field. Have we got? Oh, let's try see if we can get him back. But while we try and get Stuart Field back, he's a working man. He's in his vehicle. He's a marine engineer. Tom Slater, listening to that, I mean, it is just extraordinary, isn't it, that this has happened? And by all accounts, this isn't the only time this has happened at the only school.
No, absolutely. And it's what I find so striking about this is the sort of cognitive dissonance, isn't it? The idea that you should come in and celebrate your respective cultures, but not that one.
Yeah.
And the one that's being censored, the one that's being problematised, the one that's being treated as a bit weird and alien and whatever, is actually supposed to be the overriding national culture, the thing that's supposed to bring us together, would enable people from whatever migratory background, or whether they're English or Scottish or Welsh or whatever, to have something that we can come together towards. Why is it that's demonised? Surely that's the thing that should be more united.
I just find it extraordinary how many people, and especially again, they're in teaching, they're in the BBC, they're embarrassed, ashamed, horrified of British culture, tradition, identity, and they perceive it to be racist, they perceive it to be bigoted, to be xenophobic. And again, if our country was all those things, lots of people from many other different backgrounds and races and cultures wouldn't come to live here.
And it's
simple as that.
Also, in a country in which you do have people from many backgrounds, an overriding national identity is more important, not less. It's actually the space in which you can kind of come together, work out some shared cultural things, philosophical things, historical things that you can roughly unite around. As soon as you start treating that as jingoistic, nationalistic, you're going to end up with a more divided society, not a more united.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that when we talk about, nationalistic, as if that's a bad thing. I think we have just managed to get Stuart Field back up. Stuart, I'm glad we got you back up. We've only got about another minute left, but I was just asking you, whether, why you think so many people are so ashamed and embarrassed of British, identity, British tradition, British history.
I have no idea that they shouldn't be. For me, there's definitely a lefty woke agenda somewhere in the schooling system where they are pushing children to discouraging them from being proud of being British. It's pushed to one side. It's hidden. The people are being shamed for flying the national flag of the country. There's something there. Something's not right with the system.
Oh, we're losing again. Stuart, we persevered. We got you back again. Thank you so much for talking to us. I know you're a busy man. You see you, at work there. He's the father of Courtney Wright, the 12-year-old who was basically, banned from the classroom for wearing her national flag as a dress to represent cultural diversity. Absolutely extraordinary story, really is. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, we are going to talk to Amy Gallagher. I'd love to get her thoughts on this. She's been a very plain, outspoken soul on these issues, but also whether or not actually it's time to basically say the Supreme Court ruling was very, very clear on trans-identified men playing in women's sports. And if you don't stop that now, sports bodies, you are going to face legal action. That is what Sharon Davies, the Olympian, has said. We're going to talk about that up next. This is Talk.
But he never does press conferences, never talks to hacks like you and I, Mike. He's a bit of quizzing. That's his job.
Yeah.
I think he's skating on a very thin ice at the moment.
I think he's looking closer to the end than he's ever looked this week.
I'm afraid there's an element of truth to that. Tim is a friend, and he's done a very good job. But I think too many mistakes, too many things have ended up at his doorstep, and that's because he doesn't have a flag catcher. Amongst other, and also the systems are all there, but who's putting the system into operation?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's talk to Amy Gallagher now. She's commentator at the New Culture Forum, and let's get your thoughts first of all, Amy, on the conversation we just had with Stuart Field about a 12-year-old girl wearing her, national flag as a dress. Jerry Spice, she's been in the news for different reasons lately, but Ginger Spice, celebrating British culture. Lovely. I mean, they read the speech she wanted to read out. Lovely, positive stuff about British, the stuff we identify with Britain. Fish and chips, drinking tea, and things being sent out of the classroom by woke teachers because diversity is about other cultures, not British culture. What do you make of that?
Well, what I'm curious about is what exactly was she supposed to do? Because presumably, if she had dressed up as an alternative culture that was not her own, Indian or African, she would have been potentially called racist and told that she was culturally appropriated.
Absolutely.
But if she comes as a British, which is what she is, that's wrong as well. So she's just supposed to stay at home.
Yes, stay quiet. Stay quiet, be, you know, and quietly just, you know, just be someone you should be ashamed of because you are British. I mean, that, you're right. I mean, that is what it's about. It is quite extraordinary. I don't know, maybe we should all dress up, you know, I don't know, white Britons as, I don't know, Vikings or Germans or something. I have no idea. It is just mind-blowing, this story, isn't it? And I bet this is happening in lots of other schools as well. I mean, I'm amazed they've had time for a diversity day, because normally they're holding a pride march most of the year, as far as I can tell. That seems to be what they're mostly doing. Let's talk about something else. And again, and this is, again, another woke ideology permeated all of our schools, many of our national bodies, the BBC, we've been talking about them all day, and everywhere, particularly our sports bodies as well. And this is trans ideology. Now, we had that Supreme Court ruling a few months ago now, and we still haven't seen every single sports body basically, or indeed even places like Parliament, everyone getting to speed with the fact that men who identify or think that they are a woman, whether they've got a piece of paper saying it or not, are allowed into women's single-sex spaces. Now, in the particular area of sport, we've had the former Olympian, big friend of the show, Sharon Davies of Sex Matters, basically saying sports bodies that don't get their act together and get trans athletes out of the wrong sex category will face legal action. You'd support that, I'm sure.
Yeah, this is obviously very welcomed, but we must remember that this is being set up, led by Rosie Duffield, who's of course an independent MP, because there's an absence of leadership on this issue from our government.
Yeah.
They've accepted the Supreme Court ruling, but they haven't really done anything to challenge the sporting bodies that are still pushing this, or within the NHS or with the policing or other institutions. So, I mean, the Women's Rights Network have exposed the fact that there are 21 sports regulatory bodies that have fallen in line with the Supreme Court ruling and are saying now that men who say that they are women cannot enter into female categories within sport. There are still 38, so that's still the majority, that have not changed their regulations and are still allowing men into women's sports in some capacity.
I mean, and it ranges, doesn't it, from the lowest, park run, runs on a Sunday morning, up to, sports that are being competed, in the Olympics. And this is the extreme. The law was already the law, but the Supreme Court made it very, very clear. The Equality and Human Rights Commission issued draft guidance making it very clear. No one is banning trans athletes from sport. Anyone who identifies as trans can take part in any sport they want. They just have to do it in the correct sex category, which is the one they were born in.
Yeah, that's right. But we're still seeing sports regulatory bodies, for example, like British weightlifting, that are saying that a man who says he's a woman, but he has the same testosterone levels as a woman, he can enter into the women's category. But the Supreme Court ruling was very clear. But sex means biological sex, irrespective of your testosterone.
Yeah, by the way, men can never get down to the same testosterone levels as a woman. It's not even possible for them to do that, and that's extremely. But anyway, come on, Amy. Why on earth would you think that a man would have any advantage in weightlifting over a woman? What a silly idea that is.
Can you imagine? And even in wrestling, to this day, three months after the Supreme Court ruling, wrestling of all sports is still allowing trans women,
trans-identified men, call them what they are. This is where the confusion came. We were nice and we used she and her, and then that's what got us down this road. And we said trans women, and we're arguing about whether they're men or not. No, call them what they are: trans-identifying men.
Yeah, so in wrestling, men, as you say, are still allowed to enter into women's categories within wrestling, one of the most dangerous sports. Yep. So this is far from over.
Boxing.
And I welcome this group very much, that they're saying they're going to take legal action against these regulatory bodies. But to me, this shouldn't be happening. They should have fallen in line with this. They've had 3 months to sort it out. So you can't claim that, it's too soon. We're working on it.
It should never have happened in the first place, but actually, within 3 minutes of that Supreme Court ruling, it should have been very clear. Just finally, is there a very big issue with trans-identifying women who are living as if they were men or have a stiff gender certificate? Are they very upset about not being able to compete against men in sport, or are they happy to stay in the women's category? And if so, I wonder why.
Yeah, we never hear about trans men when it comes to sport, do we? Because, of course, it's the men that have the advantage in all of these sports, whereas the females don't. And that's why they're doing it.
Exactly. We used to have another word for this. It's called cheating. There we are. Amy Gallagher, you've been fantastic on this issue throughout, commentator at the New Culture Forum. Thank you so much. Tom Slater, I mean, this drives me crazy. But even in Parliament, they haven't, separated. There's issues. There are still men in women's prisons. There are still men using women's toilets in Parliament and elsewhere. There's still men competing in women's sports. I mean, how is this not resolved yet?
Well, I think what we're now learning is that Supreme Court ruling, while incredibly important, hard fought for and all the rest of it, it's really just the beginning. Because what we're up against here is not just a misunderstanding about what the law says. It's an ideology which has captured all of these institutions. And it's going to take a lot to push
it was
it back
never
out.
Fact-based in the first place, so the facts changing in any way won't make any difference, will they? By the way, the Defence Secretary John Healey has been in Parliament explaining this unprecedented data breach to MPs, which basically put the risk of life for thousands of Afghans who help British forces in Afghanistan. I'm sure there'll be more on that in the news as well. And we're looking at a massive relocation of Afghans as a result of their names being 30,000 names being divulged in Afghanistan, and the relocation cost £400 million. Extraordinary story. That more on that I'm sure later in the show. Ian Collins is joining us right now. What are you going to be talking about?
Me and my other half won't even play Cluedo together just to preserve the gender gap. You know, it's just not fair. There's an obvious advantage there, isn't there, with a male investigative brain?
Extraordinary. There is an advantage in chess. There's a testosterone advantage, and more men are on the autistic spectrum, which gives an advantage. It is extraordinary.
Well, here's another
advantages that are there throughout.
Apparently, men are better at Trivial Pursuit because they do general guff, and women are better.
Men remember those sort of boring facts.
Exactly.
They just can't remember to buy milk on the way home.
Women are better.
Am I right?
No, women are better at Scrabble for a similar reason.
Do you know what my Olympic sport is?
Go on.
Bananagrams.
Bananagrams.
You ever played bananagrams? It's like speed Scrabble.
Me and Tom are going, what is she talking about?
Can anyone else back me up? Bananagrams. Seriously, it's my Olympic sport. I played it the first time and went, this is my sport.
You found it.
I found my sport.
Your métier was discovered.
I play it like a demon. Bananagrams. I'm going to bring it. We're going to televise
bananas, or is it just
you get the Scrabble tiles, but you're allowed to move them all the time. You play against yourself at speed against someone else.
Oh, I like that.